The events begin to unfold in a magical kingdom, where there is a tall and strikingly beautiful palace, over which snow-white clouds slowly float. And near it, commoners have already gathered, congratulating the aristocrats on some kind of holiday. Local residents took to the streets to celebrate, carrying baskets of flower petals to scatter in all directions, laughing with joy as they celebrated this very grand event, despite the windy weather. At the very center of the celebration was the beautiful and handsome crown prince of the empire named Yalos, who smiled at everyone around him, also not hiding his joy and admiration. Besides him, there was also his charming girl with golden hair and green eyes, who smiled at everyone and was no less happy, because on this day, the entire vast empire was joyfully celebrating their wedding. And right now, the couple, already engaged, looked at everyone with delight and love. The prince's golden-haired wife waved her hand to the commoners, while the main character looked at them not with joy, but with anger. And the aristocrats at this time were preparing to board the carriage to go on vacation to the south. While the aristocrats were preparing to leave, the spectators nearby were gossiping about how a certain Madame Psyche had initially lost the fight to become the crown princess, which is why the black-haired prince had become the ruler. They remembered that her only opponent was from the ducal family, which had previously attempted to assassinate the imperial family. And because of this, there was supposedly a gloomy red sky over the ominous house of the aristocrats. And when the strangers were about to start talking about Psyche's personal life, saying that if she didn't receive the throne, she would also risk being left without a husband for the rest of her life. A girl with black hair and terrible purple eyes, the dreaded daughter of Belial named Medea, suddenly appeared before them and ordered them to remain silent. The men were confused and did not know what to say, fearing that the aristocrat would punish them. And to their horror, the lady looked at them intently and promised that she would remember them in detail, so that later she would punish them for the slightest bad words. Noticing that Malaya had simply left, leaving behind only a warning, one of the gossips began to laugh, saying that it was precisely because of weak people like this lady that the Belial family was weakening every day. But his frightened friend said that they really should speak more quietly. The empire was celebrating the wedding of the prince and his bride, and at the same time, in a nice small town, which also had a blue sky, people couldn't stop talking about strange events. For example, the fact that the body of a dead person had recently been found. A local woman and a friend were walking around town and told him that she thought the man had simply slipped and fallen. But the circumstances were so strange that they would soon be the only ones talking about it. She imagined the same man lying on the floor, showing no signs of life, his clothes dirty. But the most astonishing thing was that, according to rumors, this man had no tongue, which made it even more frightening. These were the very things that ordinary people who did not know the whole truth were talking about. But Lady Malaya, who was in the bright interiors of the palace, was also not calm, because biting her finger, she was already heading towards her mother, who had suddenly become ill. And as soon as Malaya entered her mother's room, she immediately noticed objects scattered on the floor. All because the girl's father also became terribly ill after the doctor's news that his beloved wife, who was already in poor health, would barely survive this year. Having witnessed the most terrible events of her life, when her parents almost went mad from grief, Malaya spent her days only in a dark room, where she was constantly surrounded by servants, saying that all this happened because of the fair-haired Lady Psyche, and if necessary, they could easily kill her. But then Malaya answered the ladies, saying that it was not worth killing Psyche yet, because it would be a hasty decision, because of which she herself could die. But she still promised herself to take revenge on the blonde while she continued to live a calm life, walking down the street in a bright, angelic image. While on vacation after the wedding, Psyche called her husband to her and showed him the most varied shells that she had managed to obtain near the sea, whispering that she really wanted to send a gift to the duke's daughter. The prince responded to this idea with doubt, telling the woman that she was being too kind to Malaya after what she had done to her. However, Psyche still wanted to give her something, because when she looked at the endless, clear ocean, she realized that she wanted to give the Gurg's daughter something that could only be found in such a beautiful place. At that moment, the prince himself, with an evil grin, realized that Malaya needed to be given not just jewelry, but something more valuable, which is why, after a while, a cute gift in a light package was already lying on the table in front of Malaya, but she did not dare open it. Even when the maids and servants tried to persuade Malaya not to open the gift, she still took it with a smile and opened it to find out what was inside. And when she saw the gift, she silently and intently looked at it, and then ordered the servants to send something back to Psyche because nothing disappointed her. However, as soon as the butler left, saying that he would do it right away, the Duke's daughter immediately picked up a table lamp and threw it towards the jewel, causing it to shatter into small pieces. And all the maids were horrified, trying to calm the aristocrat. Blood appeared on the heroine's hand, slowly flowing down, and this shocked the maids even more, who told Malaya to calm down. But she was only checking the jewel for the presence of hidden magic that could kill her. She looked down at the floor more attentively, seeing not only the box with the remaining fragments, but also a strange silver ring that glowed and attracted attention. However, this did not please the girl at all, because she realized with anger that Psyche not only wanted to send her a gift, but also to remind her once again that she was still not married, and it seemed that no one would ever ask her for her hand in marriage, which Malaya immediately understood thanks to the ring. This finally convinced the black-haired lady that Psyche not only hated her, but also wanted war. So the aristocrat resolutely stood up from her seat and loudly said that from that moment on, there would be no more friendship between them. And while Malaya was already preparing to create the most terrible plans to take revenge on her old friend, the Psyche herself was in Count Polly's mansion, no less large and luxurious, and the girl was already getting ready for bed, because the evening was gradually approaching night. However, when the fair-haired girl, naive and gentle, wanted to go to bed, a maid came to her and presented her with a large bouquet of red flowers along with a letter, saying that it was a gift from the Balilo house, and this surprised the girl, and she already wanted to read the letter as soon as possible to find out what Malaya had written to her. Earlier, the dark-haired girl had been diligently composing the letter that Psyche was now reading, and as a result, in addition to expressing gratitude for the gift, Medea also wrote about her bouquet, saying it was a compliment that she recommended placing next to the bed, because the scent of these beautiful flowers helps one fall asleep quickly. But while the fair-haired lady was delighted that her friend liked her gift and even sent her a bouquet, Malaya herself was already examining a certain purple potion in her hands, which she wanted to try on her friend, and Psyche, without realizing it, fell into the treacherous trap of the Garens so simply and easily. The next clear day, which made Polly's mansion look even more beautiful, the girls agreed to meet for the first time in a long time. Psyche couldn't be happier because she sincerely believed that Malaya wanted to see her. The girls were in a luxurious, blooming garden and were talking a little awkwardly. Or rather, the blonde admitted that she had to go to the temple tomorrow, but she was still glad to see her, even if only for such a short time. And Malaya replied that everything was fine and she was happy with everything. The cunning heroine also suggested to her friend not just to talk, but to drink an exclusive tea of an expensive variety, which she bought along with sugar, which she suggests Psyche add to the drink and enjoy its taste together. And after a while, the girls were indeed drinking tea. The black-haired lady kept offering Psyche even more sugar, which sometimes made the naive blonde laugh. But not far from them at the same time were the maids, who gossiped among themselves about how those aristocrats were really just talking calmly, as if there was no hostility between them. But they did not even think that at this time another person was eavesdropping on them. But the black-haired beauty remained unperturbed, holding a cup of tea in her hands and confessing to Psyche that she saw that her servants loved their mistress very much because Psyche treated the Gorons like family members, and for such a compliment the blonde thanked the girl. However, when the evil Malaya said that it was not a compliment at all because the servants had just allowed themselves to behave inappropriately by talking about them nearby, their conversation was interrupted by a blonde man in red robes who appeared near the table, and he, looking at the heroine, asked her to go home, because Psyche had to leave for the service in the harem. Seeing before her not just a knight, but Psyche's personal protector, who vows to protect all members of Polly's family to the end, the girl realized that such a loyal man would definitely not retreat. The leader is almost a faithful dog even to emperors. And the girl, having put the cup on the table with the words that she no longer had any desire to stay in the house where she was being kicked out, the heroine had already gone down to her own carriage and wanted to go home, leaving behind quiet anger and discontent in her soul. A knight stood on the balcony and watched Malaya's carriage depart, also turning to a nearby maid, asking what Lady Psyche was doing now. The maid replied that after such a meeting, the Arafat woman was lying on the bed and trying to hold back her tears. And when the maid came to Psyche again to check on her, she was horrified to see how the white-haired aristocracy was lying on the floor, not on the bed, breathing with difficulty and unable to come to her senses, as if she had suddenly been overcome by illness and the maid had immediately called the doctors. The doctor, having carefully examined the girl, stated the fact that the aristocrat's fever was only increasing, and this astonished the maids standing behind her, who were talking among themselves about how just a minute ago Psyche had been completely healthy, but now she couldn't even get out of bed. The knight with blonde hair was also thinking about this, telling everyone that they couldn't just invite anyone here because rumors would spread quickly and it would only weaken their position, which meant they needed to think harder. The knight imagined the mysterious Malaya next to the temple, telling everyone that tomorrow, when the only prayer of the year would take place, the duke's daughter would be there along with Psyche. Fully aware of the danger, the boy decided not to hesitate and set off in an unknown direction. After some time, when it was already the dead of night and only the moon illuminated the boy's path, he saddled his horse and wanted to gallop through the forest. But halfway through the journey, his horse became very aggressive and disobedient, which is why the knight did not understand what had happened to him. As a result, the horse was able not only to confuse the man, but also to knock him to the ground, after which it ran off into the depths of the forest. And the stunned man looked at his own animal and tried to find out why it behaved so strangely here, leaving him alone in the darkness and solitude. However, when the guy was about to get to his feet, trying to push himself onto the ground with his hands, he noticed a dark-haired female figure nearby, which shocked him even more and made him instantly fall silent. Raising his head, he noticed a smiling and calm Lady Malaya, who had already asked him why the fall from his horse had not yet killed him. But the guy was so amazed by her appearance that he did not try to speak, fearing for his life, because the girl's clothes were all covered in terrifying blood. Minutes earlier, he had no idea that he would meet the duke's daughter, so he rode his horse past the trees and bushes, intending to understand what plan this insidious woman had in mind, after whose appearance his mistress became very ill. Now, the guy with KI equals Como remembers that he tested Psyche's tea and flowers for poison, trying to figure out what the black-haired girl was planning, but she only smiled and said that she knew from the start that he would come, which is why she had time to prepare. However, he didn't even have a chance to say anything to the girl, because she instantly pierced him with a long sword, so mercilessly and quickly that the knight was stunned to realize that he was about to meet his death. And before his death, he clearly saw Malaya's face. She was smiling and sincerely telling the guy that she would definitely take revenge on Psyche, and do to her practically the same thing as to him, because the pain she felt should not be hers alone. Even when the knight was long dead, the girl did not stop talking to him, showing him a bottle of poison in her hands and saying with a serious face that her poison had no effect. But if you mixed it with sugar, it would work immediately. And the lifeless body of the knight, who tried to change the course of events and save his mistress, remained lying in the forest, when Malaya liked to chat with him on various topics, openly admitting that it brings her more pleasure than anything. But suddenly she heard another voice ordering her to stop everything. This man approached the main character with a smile, saying that they had managed to easily get rid of Psyche's main guard, because he was eager to hear the news that Psyche herself was about to die, and Malaya replied that they still had a lot to do for this, also calling the guy Hell. Indifferently adjusting her hair, the girl explained that because of her poison, Psyche would not die anytime soon, and would even wake up very soon. But even so, their plan was going perfectly and as it should, and they didn't even have to worry. The next day, when Psyche had recovered somewhat from her fever, she had red fish in a fragrant sauce for breakfast. But even so, she was tired and weak, barely moving, and could barely hold a fork and knife in her hands. Also sitting at the table were the blonde's mother and father, who were no less worried about her health than the doctors and subordinates. And it was her father who dissuaded his daughter from going to the ceremony in the temple, which could become even more dangerous, but Psyche told them not to worry, because she was obliged to go to the main, only holiday of the year. She, getting up from the table and lightly adjusting her golden hair, was already getting ready to go to the temple, saying goodbye to her parents with a smile, saying that her weak condition was just a slight cold that arose from a walk in the garden, but her father and mother were still worried about their daughter. And the maids did not want to sit idle, because one of them was already in the forest, where there were tall, lush trees and a rich sky, because she had previously agreed to go with the warriors into the dark area in order to find the missing knight of Psyche, about whom everyone began to worry the very next day. The maid was riding a horse and listening to the discontent of another warrior. My knight, an experienced fighter, could not have disappeared in the forest just like that, because he grew up here, and therefore, something unexpected definitely happened here, with which the gray-haired maid almost agreed. However, at some point, the girl did notice something strange nearby, which she told the others about. And they saw in front of them a strange man in purple, expensive clothes and with light hair, who was standing with his back to them, and because of which it was not clear what he was doing there. They also noticed a shocking detail, or rather a badge that glittered on the stranger's clothes. It was a golden cross, meaning he was dressed in the knightly attire that Psyche's lost protector had worn. But as soon as the stranger turned to them, they noticed with even greater surprise that in front of them was not just a strange man, but a white-haired guy with bright purple eyes, who was clearly not there for no reason. And while the maid and her warriors meet the mysterious man in the empty forest, Psyche is already at a solemn, holy ceremony, standing before the priest, who is placing a holy artifact around her neck that will grant life this year, because the fate of the entire empire is now in her hands. People joyfully applauded this event, standing near a large temple with columns, and the priest proclaimed that on this day only Psyche was allowed to enter this holy place to prevent misfortune for the entire country. However, no matter what the priest told the public, the main character, who was already next to the mysterious magician holding the golden key in his hands, was preparing to enter the temple using it as well, thanks to the minister who agreed to help. The protagonist's plan was going exactly as it should, because she was already ceremoniously opening the gates of the large temple and preparing to descend the long steps, which made the structure seem even larger on the inside than on the outside. At the same time, the warriors with the maid, who were unlucky enough to meet an unknown white-haired man on their way, were already regretting their actions because he immediately attacked them and dealt one of the knights a strong blow to the face, causing him to fall, covering his bloody face. The warrior understood perfectly well that he was destined to die in this place, and sometimes he glanced at the mysterious guy with a long sword and dark clothes, realizing that he was much stronger than him, which is why all hopes of achieving the right would remain just hopes. He wanted to turn to the maid, warning her that she needed to run away from here immediately and call someone for help. But imagine his surprise when she indifferently walked past him in the direction of the unknown, leaving the red-haired guy to die on the ground. The shocked warrior recalled the moment when the maid seemed to behave quite normally and did not arouse suspicion, but the fact that she once spoke with the knight about the condition of her mistress blinded him to see her in a completely different way. Realizing that the maid was just a spy who cleverly hid in someone else's surroundings, the stunned warrior looked at her and asked how this was possible. But the girl did not even answer him, talking only to the blonde man and some plan about the duke's daughter. The white-haired boy decided to take the poor guy's life so he wouldn't suffer anymore. But before that, the maid sadly reminded him that she had previously promised that she could go into the forest alone, but only because he hadn't listened to her. The warrior died tragically, becoming another drop of water destined to disappear forever in the surface of the water. At this moment, Psyche, who was standing near the sacred fountain with the statue of an angel, was unaware that she was being actively hunted, and therefore continued her service as if nothing had happened. The girl listened to the drops falling into the water again and again and prayed, clasping her hands together, enjoying the silence and doing everything she could to not only cleanse herself spiritually, but also to wish the gods well-being for her empire. The fair-haired, kind aristocrat was kneeling before the statue, not even thinking of meeting Malaya, who was already behind her and simply waiting for the right moment to complete her grandiose plan. She decided to simply walk up to Psyche and, taking off her hood, sit down next to her, which caused a surprised Psyche to look at her and at first not believe her eyes, but then calm down, realizing that she was seeing an old acquaintance here. Without thinking twice, the calm Psyche asked her friend what she had done to her knight. And soon a smile appeared on Malaya's face, and with wide eyes the girl asked the blonde what she meant and why she thought she could have done something. And the white-haired lady aide did not let her friend finish her sentence because she immediately pounced on her and knocked her to the floor, which left the main character in shock. Psyche, almost sobbing, began to ask Malaya why she was so offended by her and why she held a grudge against her, because she didn't even really love the prince. So it couldn't be said that the blonde simply took him away from her, and Psyche screamed that the heroine only loved his title. But Malaya remained calm, even when Psyche's tears fell directly on her face, and she also asked the girl in response, like, did she really think that she would play with her this tedious game of emotions that was happening now? The girl also asked Psyche if she was sure that she would give her the throne just like that, and this made the tearful woman look at her friend with even more sadness, realizing that she was not as kind as she had previously thought. The dark-haired Malaya became completely disgusted when she noticed on Psyche's chest a golden and precious cross, which the priest had given her earlier with a blessing, the hope that she would be the ruler of a great empire. Therefore, Malaya wanted to push Psyche away from herself, saying that it was absurd for her to even think that the fate of the empire was in her hands. But at that moment, she felt that she could not lean her hand on the edge of the fountain, and she fell into the water up to her elbow. Psyche was horrified when she saw before her the terrible picture of Malaya falling into a deep fountain and not even being able to try to get out, because large splashes and icy water immediately hindered her movements. But Psyche kept extending her hand to her friend in the hope of saving her. Soon, nothing was left of the main character except a smooth surface of water, because she fell under the water so deep that her silhouette was no longer visible. And the Psyche realized with horror that Malaya was about to die, even though it was she who came to kill her. The girl, seemingly unconscious from the fall, did not move as she sank to the bottom of the fountain. The air was running out faster and faster, leaving practically no time to react. And therefore the shocked lady realized that in her pursuit of the perfect plan and revenge, she had not noticed how she had created danger for herself. However, when the girl looked at the glare of light visible on the surface through the water, she suddenly realized that she could breathe and was not even suffocating, which made her wonder if some divine force was currently influencing her. Having decided that the god himself had contacted her, the girl did not simply look at Psyche's hand, which was already about to pull her friend out of the water and help her, but asked the deity to make everything so that instead of such a stupid girl as Psyche, she would rule the empire. She wished for this as sincerely and honestly as she could. When the golden-haired girl with anxiety on her face was already holding her hand and wanted to free her from the water, to do everything so that she would survive, even if they were enemies, Psyche's beautiful amulet floated in the water and glittered. But the main character herself was squeezing Psyche's shoulder with such hatred and malice, a desire for revenge even now, that it seemed that God would not hear her prayer and would leave everything as it was. However, everything turned out not to be so hopeless, because the heroine still managed to survive. Because after some time, she woke up in a completely different place. A room where she sometimes heard the voices of people, doctors, but the ice water and the fountain, Psyche were no longer there. As soon as she woke up, all the servants and maids immediately ran to her. Even the butler was in shock. He kept asking the protagonist how she felt after what happened, and the girl did not understand what was happening and where she was. The white-haired servant even began to cry in front of the bewildered protagonist, trying to persuade her not to lie and not to disturb them. But in fact, the heroine really did not remember anything and did not understand why everyone around was talking about some incident in the temple. And when the girl approached the mirror, trying to understand why she was surrounded by the blonde servants, she realized with silent defeat that she now had the appearance of the hated Psyche, which surprised her more and more with each passing minute. The main character did not believe that this was reality, assuming that it was just a dream. But at that moment, the worried crown prince burst into her room, who immediately looked at his wife, wanting to make sure that everything was okay with her. The guy immediately approached the girl and began kissing her palms, saying that all this time he was afraid that she would never wake up. But fortunately, everything worked out. And Malaya herself realized with shock that everything around her was real, including the fact that she was now in the body of Psyche. But she was even more surprised by the prince himself, who stroked her head, looked into her eyes and promised to deal with that scoundrel as harshly and strictly as possible, since it was the duke's daughter who ruined the prayer day and almost killed his beloved wife. However, while embracing his wife, the crown prince had no idea that in reality, his wife had only taken on the appearance of Psyche. Although in reality, the evil and insidious Malaya stood before him, whose plan not only succeeded, but fulfilled all of her dreams at once. Psyche herself received Malaya's body, which is why, when she was in front of a mirror in a dark space, she was surprised and could not understand why she felt normal, but saw Malaya in the reflection. She tried to pinch herself and felt pain, which puzzled her even more. She touched the mirror and asked herself only one question regarding whether she was really in reality. With thoughts about who could be in her body, the girl decided to go down the dark steps that she noticed nearby, and each of her steps echoed throughout the palace as if there was nothing and no one in it, which frightened the girl even more. And as soon as the girl noticed not only an unfamiliar interior nearby, but also strange maids, she panicked even more, stepping aside with the hope that she could at least escape from here. But everything was in vain. The black-haired lady wanted to quickly go out, but the maids and the butler did not give her passage, and they were very surprised by the unusual, frightened command of the mistress, asking what was wrong and why she was so eager to go outside if there was a heavy downpour. The girl could clutch her head in despair because the only thing she understood was that she wanted to quickly find herself at home among her family and friends, but not in a scary ducal mansion, over which even a terrifying lightning sparkled. While the new Psyche in a foreign body could not get used to the changes and it seemed to her that she was about to go crazy, Malaya was already able to get used to her new role in life, asking the crown prince whether she really wanted to kill the duke's daughter. In fact, the sweet girl smiled slyly while no one was looking, and the treacherous lady herself was thinking that now she could easily order her new husband to behead Psyche in her body. But she did not want to seem evil to him, which is not typical of Psyche herself. But Crown Prince Yalos only grabbed his head in displeasure, covering his face and telling his wife with a heavy sigh that he knew she would say this, as if it upset him more than anything else. What was even more unexpected was the appearance of Psyche in the mansion, in the body of a friend who hysterically turned to the maids and asked them to take her to the blonde, but they refused, explaining that the ruler was currently with the prince, and this news greatly shocked the girl. And a shiver ran through the frightened Psyche's body when the door in front of her finally opened and the crown prince, her true husband, appeared from it. He had no idea that the girls had swapped bodies, but he looked at Psyche so sternly, as if he was already preparing torture for her. He was not afraid to push the black-haired girl and make her step back, saying that he did not want to interrogate her because she was too ill. But if she could even walk now, which is why she came here, he was sure that she was in good health for the trial. Looking at Psyche with crazy and angry white eyes, the guy said that she should be grateful to him for not cutting her throat almost immediately after what happened, which is why she is alive and practically unharmed. Malaya, stunned by the blonde body of her opponent, watched all this. And just watching her old friend being humiliated brought her such unprecedented pleasure that she even had to hold back her laughter. Malaya was pleased that the crown prince could not recognize his wife even in a different guise. And while the blonde was enjoying her new role, and the rain continued to fall outside the aristocrat's palace, Prince Yalos proclaimed that from now on Lady Belial was not allowed to appear in this mansion. Malaya, delighted with such a victory, gradually began to get used to the new sensations and body, touching various objects and paying attention to her hands, which turned out to be very fragile and thin, like the soul of the true Psyche. But at that moment, when the girl was alone, a maid with gray hair came into her room and with excitement on her face said that she needed to tell her mistress something important. So the ladies decided to sit down on the sofa, where the spy maid confessed to Malaya that she was an informer, explaining that she needed money to pay off her brother's and sister's hospital debts. And Malaya herself was surprised by the story, because she thought that her family was weaker, but as it turned out, this was not so, and people believed her. And Malaya, in Psyche's body, continued to play the role of a kind, understanding, sensitive girl, hugging the crying maid and telling her that she was sorry that everything had happened this way, and even more sorry that she had not been able to notice this problem earlier, although everything was completely wrong. In fact, the lady wanted to do something terrible to the servant, for example, rip out her tongue and feed it to the dogs. But when night fell, the heroine calmed down and decided that if she woke up in her body on this full moon, she would definitely kill not only the servant, but also Psyche's entire family. But when the lady woke up, she was already reaching out to the luxurious golden chandelier, realizing that she had not returned to her own body, which is why she decided not to kill the maid, but to continue playing the role of a sweet lady. She couldn't stop looking at the new hands, tender and different from hers. So she looked at them even in bed when she woke up from sleep, thinking about how being reborn in the body of her enemy was a great success. After that, she clenched her fist tightly, thinking that now it was clear to her that she and Psyche had swapped bodies as a result of magic, and it seemed that this would be for life unless other special spells were found. But Psyche was not happy about her friend's body, being in another place and sitting on the bed with sadness, looking at the window with the thought that even if God fulfilled someone's wish, he definitely ignored what she wanted. The girl recalled the holy temple and remembered that the next day of prayer would come only in a year, and all this time she would have to live in the body of another person. And perhaps there was no magic in the world that could fix everything. What frightened the girl even more was that in this world Malaya had many enemies who wanted her dead, and it turned out that she would be constantly surrounded by them, as if she were in a fire from which it was impossible to escape or hide. Psyche continued to be sad, thinking that even if the real Malaya was stronger than all the enemies combined, she would never be able to defeat them, because her soul was much weaker, and she did not even understand how anyone could go through what her black-haired friend had gone through. It was with these thoughts that the lady continued to sit on the bed, fully understanding that although she looked very menacing, she was still weak and weak in spirit, because of which she could be killed for the slightest manifestation of weakness or clumsiness in dangerous society. One maid was also worried about her, bringing her water to bed, saying that she was very worried about her because the aristocrat did not come out to dinner, having missed almost all possible meals. But when the lady with the stutter also wanted to talk about the fact that she had brought the mistress some soup so that she could at least eat something, she was afraid that the evil, black-haired aristocrat would roast her or get furious again because of her stuttering. But she was amazed that Psyche simply picked up a spoon and sweetly thanked her. This struck the girl so much that she looked at the good lady with admiration, saying that after a while she could clean her room and make her bed if the aristocrat wanted it. But while the girl was gradually getting used to her new life and her new body, without changing her kindness, one black raven, which had been watching her through the window all this time, flew to its owner. It turned out to be a fair-haired guy with bright violet eyes, who stretched out his hand to the raven and, with his help, followed the lady in order to find out something valuable. The raven flew in and landed on the guy's hand, and he became even sadder when he looked at the bird and realized that this time Malaya had not opened her window, which is why his raven returned to him empty-handed. But despite the fact that they had not contacted for 7 years, he was still sure that she was okay. A butler entered his room with a very large stack of books and notes, saying that today's schedule would be very busy, but the aristocrat himself was already behind him and was leaving somewhere, taking a dark cape with him. Noticing that the guy was getting ready to go somewhere, the gray-haired butler quickly put down his books and headed towards the aristocrat, asking him where he was headed. But the blonde only raised his head to him and replied that he wanted to visit Lady Malaya, although she could reprimand him for his unscheduled visit. The stunned butler asked the boy what he would do with the work he hadn't done, and the aristocrat replied that he had already done everything that needed to be done yesterday, and after that the boy hurried to leave the brown, multi-story building in which he lived. And looking at how the lord was already getting into the carriage with a stern face, he understood that he was very worried about Lady Malaya, because lately strange rumors had been circulating about her, saying that something unthinkable had happened to her. And while the psyche in someone else's body was sad, and others were worried about it, Millet, on the contrary, was very excited about the new role, because she looked at herself in the mirror with a smile and tried on the new, golden necklace that the crown prince had given her and which she would wear on her birthday. The maid also suggested that the blonde look out the window, where beautiful, pink-colored blossoming trees could be seen, telling her that the count had planted these trees to help her recover quickly, and that it must be so pleasant to walk there with the prince. Therefore, the lady, without thinking twice, decided to go out and take a walk with her new husband, playing the role of a good lady, sighing next to him, saying that sometimes she gets very stuffy from constantly staying inside the palace, and the black-haired guy next to her is surprised that the girl calls him an aristocrat, although they are already engaged and are a couple. He looked at her with a smile and said that she could just call him by his first name, without formalities, and the main character herself was surprised, realizing that she was not yet used to calling the crown prince by his first name, and believing that he was her husband. But she, too, smiled, telling the prince that from this council on she would call him Yalos. But in her head, she only liked the fact that everything was going smoothly and without incident, thanks to which she could enjoy her new role to the fullest. She thought that after the day they officially got married and when the emperor died, she would become a member of the imperial family and rule the empire. But when she looked at the gate, she realized that any step to the side could be suspicious, because Polly's family was too caring. The thing is, the girl still wanted to contact Helly and her other comrades, so she told the prince that she wanted to celebrate her recovery with a trip to the market, and Yalos readily agreed to arrange a meeting for the lady, thanks to which she was already in a crowded market, where there were not only tall buildings but also many shops with goods. The first thing the girl did while in a library was to acquire a messenger raven in a cage, which she was about to take with her with a smile in order to communicate with her white-haired partner. And after that, she sat down at the table, doing some reading. But she thought hard about what the prince had previously warned her with the words that she should stay out of the way when they were deciding state affairs, which clearly indicated that the prince might not trust her or was drawing such an imaginary line because she was not yet his legal wife. She thought that she would still like to listen to what the prince and his companions were talking about regarding politics, but she still knew that she would sooner or later rule the empire, which is why she was already calmly reading a book, sitting at the red table near the cabinet. Not even 3 minutes had passed when Prince Yalos entered her room, asking the girl if he had kept her waiting. And the blonde answered him with a smile, and said that she had not been bored here at all, because she had decided to read some books. On the table, the guy noticed a red book, which the lady had been reading all this time. It had strange letters and hieroglyphs on the cover that were incomprehensible at first glance. But when he realized what his wife had been reading, he was incredibly surprised. After this, at one point, he even laughed, but still held back his laughter. However, this was perfectly noticed by the main character, who looked at him with bewilderment, asking herself whether he had just laughed at her. This made her even forget about what had happened before, with her lips parted in shock, trying to understand why her husband was laughing at her. But when Malaya remembered that she was in the body of the slightly stupid and naive Psyche, she seemed to understand everything. As it turned out, the book told about the fall and rise of the great empire of Eferanto, in which they live. And when the smiling prince took it in his hands, he looked at Malaya with a smile and said that such topics were too complex for her, and if she wanted, he could buy her a simpler book, for example, a fairy tale with pictures. This surprised the blonde so much that a dark aura and a tense atmosphere quickly formed between them, where the prince even looked at his wife with a stern gaze and glowing eyes. And Malaya did not believe that Yalos could say such a thing to someone who truly loved him. While the main character realized that she was being pinned by an even more suspicious character than she and Psyche, Psyche herself, in someone else's body, was in the dark and afraid of every rustle, holding only a candlestick in her hands, thereby lighting her way. She became even more scared at that moment when terrible blood-red hands began to appear from the darkness, reaching out to her and saying in an ominous voice that this was not their real lady, but only a non-entity who looked like Malaya. They approached the black-haired girl and frightened her not only with words, but also with threats. If she was so weak and insignificant, she shouldn't be in such a place and pretend to be Malaya any longer. Remembering who she really was, the blonde became herself for a moment, showing herself and saying that everything was completely wrong and she wanted to fix it. But despair and fear prevented her from striving for this. This is exactly what she said to her own husband, who was indifferent to her words, because he already held the sword in his hands and said that he would behead her right now, not even suspecting that the soul of his wife had ended up in Malaya's body. A clean and long sword reached towards her and creaked along the pole, and the blonde realized that she couldn't run anywhere, which is why she could only watch in horror what was happening, realizing that her death was about to come. But suddenly, at the moment when the execution was about to take place, she woke up, again in Malaya's body, breathing heavily and wiping her forehead from the port, realizing that all this was a terrible nightmare. But it was precisely this that could become reality if nothing was done. The smiling maid didn't even look at her, no longer afraid of her previously stern and strict mistress, so she simply did her job, straightening the curtains and allowing the morning advice to penetrate the bedroom, and she also asked Psyche how she slept. Psyche understood that her life had turned into a nightmare, and Malaya in her body was still in the library with the prince, silent because she was shocked by her husband's words, and he only asked again, clarifying with the blonde why she had suddenly become silent. He looked at her not only with bewilderment but also with suspicion, as if he already saw oddities in Psyche's behavior. And thanks to this, the heroine realized that she needed to continue playing the role of the gentle and stupid Psyche. Therefore, the girl decided to pretend to cry, wiping away a tear with her hand and telling Yalom that she didn't want to start a conversation about this, so as not to bother him once again. And that's why she apologized for this, and the girl's behavior surprised the guy. And when the girl decided to whisper something in his ear, saying that this was exactly what she really wanted to talk about, the guy was very surprised, which was clearly visible on his stunning face. He suggested that the lady talk about this elsewhere, and so the couple was already in the carriage, heading home, when the sunset had already come and the carriage of the imperial couple passed by numerous trees. In it, the girl confessed to her husband that, in fact, after a series of fainting spells, she had difficulty remembering moments in her life, because a fog had formed in her head that prevented her from remembering everything and putting the pieces of her memories together. And she took the book in order to calm down a little. And for this, she apologized to Yalos with a bit of pretense, and he only said that everything was fine and he understood everything. But while they both seemed to be acting sweetly and showing each other their love, in reality they weren't even smiling, were looking in different directions and weren't thinking about themselves, preferring to take care of different things. While Malaya, in the body of a blonde, realized her true role in the emperor's family, Psyche listened to the singing of sweet, bright birds outside the window and wondered what had caused such terrible nightmares. She supposed it might be guilt or grief, And with these thoughts, she held a cup of tea in her hands, continuing to think about her terrible situation in complete silence. But a kind maid decided to please her. She appeared nearby and told the lady that she had prepared for her thick cookies with chocolate particles, which should definitely lift her spirits. But the lady still remained sadly silent. The thing is that Psyche, being in the body of the evil Malaya, remembered the evil and scary-looking castle in which she lives. Realizing that in such a cold place, the maids became much kinder immediately after she showed her merciful nature. And the Duke and Duchess, her new parents, rarely appear. Her mother is still seriously ill. With the same sadness, the girl decided to go out for a walk and, standing near the apple tree, looked at the house. Thinking that she had recently sent a letter to the lady, but still had not received an answer from Melee, which devastated her inside and made her wonder if she would stay in this body forever. And when the girl remembered that in this environment there was only one person whom she wanted to avoid meeting, suddenly a knight appeared nearby, who began waving his hand and calling her as if someone very important had arrived. The black-haired lady looked into the distance in shock, listening to the knight say that the Marquis would soon arrive here. And this news shocked not only the heroine, but also the maid who was standing nearby. Psyche was afraid of meeting him, and until that moment she had not even imagined that he would come to her. But everything that the knight told her was the pure truth, because the Marquis was already in the carriage, which was moving past the houses. The white-haired boy looked mysteriously out the window and thought only about Melly, about the dryness around her, and about what had actually happened. Psyche imagined in his head Malaya's assistant in political and aristocratic affairs, a guy named Hel, who is also a young Marquis, the head of the 7 Traviums, and who also works closely with Malaya and her family. She recalled that when he was a young boy, he lost his parents in an accident, and after that, he visited his beloved parents' graves every year, sadly realizing that adulthood had come much earlier than he thought. But that wasn't all, because after the tragic death of his parents, his dues seemed to split, because the nobles around and all the aristocrats wanted to get rid of him as quickly as possible, so that the little boy wouldn't receive anything from the inheritance, but they didn't manage to get even a cent. After all, one day he managed to meet Lady Malaya, who turned out to be the only salvation and solution to all problems. So one day, he knelt before her, being in a magical field under the night sky, and swore that he would serve her all his life for victory in the battle for his inheritance. She not only helped him with political affairs, holding his hand, even though the guy was covered in blood and wounds, but also smiled at him, telling him that everything would be fine, which was exactly what the lost Hel needed, who looked at Lei as if she were his personal angel. Thanks to this, he quickly recovered and strove to conquer the heights because he fought with such fury and strength that any enemy surrendered, and any battle looked like a fight not for life but for death. And because of this, the young man was able to surprise everyone with his success in the military field. She remembers how she once saw him with a glass of wine in his hand, and then she did not dare to talk to him, because he stared at her with his sinister eyes, and this frightened her. But now the lady wonders if she will be able to deceive him if the Marquis has known Malaya all his life. And right now the Marquise is already getting out of the carriage, anticipating a meeting with the girl and not even suspecting that if Malaya has not changed in appearance, then internally he probably won't even recognize her. All because this is Psyche. The white-haired boy appeared before the Psyche and addressed her with all due respect, greeting her. But the black-haired girl looked at him with slight surprise, while the servants and the palace guard bowed low to the arriving guest. Hel was glad to see that she was healthy and on her feet, so he smiled warmly, asking the girl how she was feeling. But this did not make the heroine feel any better. She only said that they hadn't seen each other for a very long time, and Hel continued to talk, saying that he had dreamed of meeting her for a long time. But Psyche was silent, begging herself and her thoughts to restrain her emotions, because any word she said might seem strange to the guy. Then Hel decided to look at the luxurious garden, which was still very well kept and beautiful. He realized that his fears were not confirmed because the place looked normal and peaceful, although he was worried that something would happen to the heroine. However, when he realized that this calm could also be quite suspicious, he was called by the Duke standing behind him, Malaya's father, who said that he heard a noise from the street, but understood everything when he saw him and therefore decided to go out to say hello. And Hel laughed. And while the Duke was telling us that something had happened down the Western River last week, the main character herself stood nearby, embarrassed, and looked at the Duke, realizing that this was her new father, and that she was seeing him so close for the first time. She nervously pressed her lips and closed her eyes, not understanding how best to behave, because at one moment it seemed to her that the Marquis had already guessed everything, although the girl still reassured herself that it was very difficult to guess that another soul had settled in a person. But she was surprised by the fact that the Duke suddenly offered the white-haired guy to talk to the girl, because a lot of time had passed after a certain tournament, and under it the lady felt depressed, and this also struck Hel. When the maids were already telling the Duke that they would accompany him to the training ground, and that an interesting confrontation awaited them, hinting that the heroine would fight Hel right now, Psyche realized that she had to stop this, because she had never learned to fight. The girl shouted to everyone that she was not ready to fight, but suddenly she felt Hel take her braid and look at her in amazement, admitting that he had never seen a lady braid her hair like that. And this made Psyche also remain silent in surprise. He smiled, saying that this was the first time in his memory that he had seen Malaya with pigtails, and Psyche in her body understood that she could easily squeeze herself out, not knowing that it turned out that Malaya would never have done pigtails for herself, and besides, she did not behave as strangely as she was now. This moment was too tense for Psyche, because of which she seemed to find herself completely alone in the void, afraid that sooner or later she would be discovered and everyone would understand that Psyche's soul had settled in Malaya's body. However, the tournament was destined to take place even though the lady did not want to go to it, because she was already right in the center of the arena with the Marquis, and the maids looked at them from afar and talked about how they had not fought for a very long time and they were interested in watching the fight. The white-haired guy immediately took the sword in his hands and looked at his opponent with a smile, saying that he wanted her to be gentler with him, because he hadn't practiced with her for a long time and, besides, he knew that Malia's strength could easily knock him to the ground. But the black-haired girl still looked at him with devastation and sadness, realizing that she would not be able to show everyone the power of astrology, which she did not even have. And the best swordsman of the Empire, which Hel is, would easily defeat her. And sometimes Psyche wonders how strong Malaya is that everyone is afraid of her. She asked herself if she could lift the piece of metal that was the dream next to her. And to find the answer to that question, she reached out to the weapon, hesitantly preparing to engage in battle. And when she finally managed to do it and raised the sword over her head, she was surprised, realizing that she was strong enough. Or the sword was so light that she could easily control it. At that moment, Hel was looking at her, and memories flashed through his head of how Malaya first taught him to hold a sword in his hands. That he held it hesitantly, and it seemed like the weapon was about to fall out of his hands. And the girl said that he was holding it incorrectly. They were in the forest where no one could disturb them, and the short-haired Malaya in the red dress continued to tell the guy where his hands should be during strikes and how to properly hold the sword despite its weight. The aristocrat forever remembered her kind face and support, thanks to which Hel was able to easily learn to fight and later even become the best swordsman in the Empire, whom other knights did not risk fighting. And suddenly, noticing that the girl took the sword with only one hand, he not only stopped her, but grabbed the blade of the sword with his palm, stopping the duel, which greatly surprised the heroine. The girl was even more alarmed by the fact that the white-haired guy walked up to her and with a scary look in his eyes said that Malaya would never hold a sword with one hand, but that it was just an elementary mistake, which was very unlike her. At that moment, the girl with shaking hands turned to the god, asking him if Hel had revealed that she was not the real Malaya, and at that moment the sword could easily fall from her shaking hand. But remembering how the real Malaya addressed her subjects, she decided that she would continue to play the role of the villain. So she looked at the guy with hatred and asked why he had just addressed her so disrespectfully and without formalities. Having also called the guy an impudent idiot, the lady forced him to move away, and Hel looked at the girl for a long time as if he could not find the words to describe his emotions and feelings. But that wasn't all, because the girl unintentionally placed the blade of her action right to Hel's neck, causing him to freeze, and Psyche thereby trying to prove to everyone around her that she was still tough and domineering and should not be treated so disrespectfully. The lady with purple eyes also looked her opponent in the eye and said that it seemed like he had completely forgotten about the things she had done to him, even about how she had helped him in his childhood, which was unacceptable for her. But no matter how much Lady Psyche tried to play Malaya, the white-haired guy still understood everything, looking at the girl with long, dark hair and thinking that even if in front of him on the outside was the same daughter of the Duke, inside it seemed like she was a completely different person, but who exactly he could not understand. Thinking that he had simply made a mistake since he hadn't seen Malaya for a long time, he decided to approach her, taking a couple of steps which alerted the already frightened girl. And as soon as he did this, a large pool of blood immediately appeared on the ground, which flowed from his body, because Psyche still had not removed the sword, hoping that she could frighten Hel only with this. The thing is, the guy wasn't afraid to grab a sharp blade and cut off her hands with it, to hug the cut ones, like the girl's hand, and sadly say that if the lady thinks that he has done something unacceptable, he will accept the most severe punishment from her, and this incredibly shocked Psyche, who until then was even afraid of hurting people. The guy said that he was ready to pay her back even with his own blood, still touching the blade of the sword and deliberately making cuts on his fingers, deeper and more painful, and the blade itself wounded not only his hand, but also his neck. Noticing that he wasn't afraid to cut his own throat, the girl immediately threw the sword aside, thereby frightening and surprising the white-haired guy. But Psyche wasn't going to hurt people just because of what Malaya used to be like. And she looked at the guy again with anger, said that their duel was over, and the maids, meanwhile, were already picking up the sword from the ground, cleaning everything up and putting it in order. Taking the sword in their hands, the maid and the butler looked at it in surprise, saying that they didn't think that blood would be spilled in their first training battle. Although Malaya and Hel always used real swords in battles, this had never happened before. The servants continued to gossip about what had happened between the couple and what their relationship was now, and Hel at this time already had a bandage on his neck. But even through it, blood from an unhealed wound was still visible. He stood in front of the main character and apologized for what happened, saying that it was some kind of commotion, not a battle, and the lady sheepishly adjusted her hair and replied that everything was fine. But he also looked at the lady and asked if she would be present at the future banquet at the royal palace, and he asked the girl if he could attend it as her escort. And the main character, noticing that the Marquise's eyes were red from the fact that he was still holding back tears, decided to reach out to him and thereby calm him down, thinking that Hel was probably still reproaching herself for what happened at the tournament. She touched his cheek in such a way that the guy himself was surprised, and he was even more amazed when the girl Sarah answered that of course she could go with her to the royal banquet. Psyche and Malaya's body even smiled, asking the man who, if not him, would accompany her to the celebration, since it was him she trusted and was ready to rely on him. And after the meeting with Hel was over, the girl stared at her hand, trembling from shock, and did not believe that she had managed to do such a thing. But she was still glad, because now Hel would not think about her strange behavior earlier. The girl also looked at her hand because it was with it that she was able to injure someone for the first time, or rather, to cut the Marquise's throat, thanks to which Psyche proved to herself that she was capable of deciding on something incomprehensible to herself. But she also remembered that it was not Otona who was accurate, but Malaya, because she was not capable of being so tough. And yet, with a pleasant smile on her face, she looked into the distance and realized that now she could be more than just a sweet and kind, naive girl. The Marquis had already come out to meet his house butler, who took an umbrella in his hands and straightened it, looking in surprise at the cloudy weather and rain, asking himself where such a heavy downpour had already begun. And he didn't have to wait long, because a couple of Enis later, the Marquise's carriage had already arrived at the house, and Hel could have been about to get out of it, and the mustachioed butler was already hurrying to meet the aristocrat and help him go to the mansion. He held an umbrella over him, protecting him from the rain, and asking the Marquis how the meeting with the Duchess had gone, to which the thoughtful and withdrawn young man replied that something strange had happened at the meeting, which still hadn't left him alone. And the guy was not just stunned by the visit to the lady, but worried, looking at his hand and saying that Malaya called him by the name Helio today, although she had not called him that for a very long time, since the moment he became an adult. And something was clearly wrong here. He clenched his hand into a fist from anger and incomprehension, trying to find an answer to everything and fully understanding that if Malaya suddenly began to call him that way, it meant that something had changed, but he could not understand what exactly. And while the Marquis was worried even more, trying to figure out for himself what had happened to his friend Malaya, the true Medea did not even think about him, because she was in a luxurious imperial palace, playing the role of Psyche in her body, when there were dark clouds above the night sky. The maid helped Malaya comb her golden hair, doing it very carefully and neatly, also asking the aristocrat why she couldn't sleep again today, and also clarifying whether it was because of worries. And the girl smiled sweetly in the mirror, saying that she was looking forward to the day when her husband's birthday would come, because at the upcoming celebration they would stand next to each other in public for the first time since their engagement, and the lady even told the Garincha that it was very romantic and charming. The girl imagined a real celebration with live music, an orchestra, dancing, and aristocrats, thinking that all the representatives of the highest nobility and influential people from other countries would gather at the upcoming celebration. And the girl also imagined how she would come to the wedding with the prince, her husband smiling at everyone and showing her happiness. Besides, there would be so many desserts and sweets at the celebration that she definitely wouldn't have time to try every single one of them. One dark-haired maid was already getting ready to leave and told her mistress that she, too, was incredibly pleased that the imperial couple would be at the center of all the events. And the girl also wished the heroine goodnight as she closed the door. And the fair-haired Malaya waved her hand in response, said goodbye, and also wished her goodnight. But her smile was false, because she was already tired of playing the kind and weak girl who only does what she is told. She decided to send her hairstyle, which the maid had previously created with trepidation, and said to herself that she was already really tired of that fellow servant and was already thinking about getting rid of not only her, but also everyone who irritated her. But she still sighed, thinking that everything would become meaningless after her marriage with Yalos, so she decided to sit at the table, where there was already a cage with a raven, and next to it a couple of lemons, which the lady would not eat, but would do something else with it. She dipped her pen in lemon juice and began writing with it on paper so that the ink and her message as a whole would not be visible. But the person to whom she wanted to send the letter would still know how to read it, because in order to see the text, she would need to hold the pen over a fire. She also recalled the sacred cross, thinking that now it was unlikely that anyone would guess that a body swap had taken place. But she was very sure that Heli, her partner, should have already noticed the strangeness in her behavior, since Psyche's Lucia was stuck in her body. She remembered how the same cross was on Psyche's neck even when they were both underwater, and the girl realized that such a small detail as a letter would help put everything in its place and assemble all the puzzles of this complex puzzle. And Malaya turned to the raven, telling him that now she would attach a letter to his paw, which he would take with him and deliver to the recipient. Having done everything as it should, the raven quickly flew out of the main character's window late at night so that no one would see such a suspicious moment, and the bird was already about to fly high into the sky, where no one would see it. A letter with lemon text was securely fastened to her paw. The raven, like a mystical creature, croaked and glowed in the moonlight, already flying up, and the heroine anticipated the moment when Hel would read the letter and learn the truth. But he was not destined to fly to him, because that same night the bird died tragically and its dead body was in a dark room, and the one who cruelly took his life was already holding the letter over the candles and reading it. The man carefully read the letter, stating that Melek was currently not in his mansion, but in Psyche Polly's house, and the girl also gradually described all the most important things in the letter. The dark room was so quiet and lifeless that it seemed as if no one was there. But the man, who had already learned the terrible secret, calmly finished reading the letter and the terrible truth was revealed to him. And after he had read everything that Malaya had written to Hel without any strong emotions, he folded the letter and said that he understood everything, also addressing the servant who had come to his office to report something. He, in turn, bowed and briefly explained that the raven had flown out of Psyche's window and that he had seen it during his nightly rounds. And further investigation confirmed that the letter was supposed to go to Marquis Helio of the Travium family. And to this, the prince replied that it was good work. And the guy, not even noticing that the candle flame was already burning the letter, looked at the servant with crazy eyes and said that they would go to the count at once to give him some kind of surprise. And right now, the main character was looking at the moon, which was shining with an incredibly beautiful light, and it was also decorating the clouds floating past in the sky, thinking about what awaited her. The blonde girl, who was actually Malaya, stared at the Earth's satellite and thought about how her letter should have already set off. However, she laughed, continuing to look at the dark sky and saying that the letter should intentionally go into the hands of the prince, which she had foreseen in advance and had already used for her own purposes. The fact is that the girl sent the real letter not with the help of a raven, but with the help of a very ordinary black cat, on whose tail a purple cloth was visible, which was the real message. The white-haired boy took the cat, who had already managed to come to Hel, into his arms and began calling her sweetly. But when he noticed something strange on her, he stopped talking in surprise. At first he thought it was just a piece of paper on his tail, but when he reached out to the object, he realized with a smile that it was a letter that she was about to read. And he was even more surprised when he realized that the letter was not just any letter, but from the Princess of the Empire. And while the guy was already reading the letter from Lelia early in the morning, Malaya herself, in Psyche's body, was already on her feet, smiling and looking at herself in the mirror with an unperturbed expression, pretending that everything was fine. The girl was talking to the maid about the main character needing to put her hair up so that her jewelry would look even more attractive and bright, when a magical prince suddenly appeared in their room, looked at his wife and said that it seemed like she probably wanted to tell him something. And for this, the couple decided not to stay in the protagonist's bedroom, but to go to the living room, where the maids had already prepared cookies and hot tea for them. And Malaya herself was preparing to play the role of a kind and naive girl, telling something. The girl didn't just want to look stupid, but to continue to reassure the prince with her naivety and simplicity, which was false, and she looked at him with a smile, telling him that today she was incredibly happy for the reason that she dreamed of him today. But the prince remained silent, realizing that he wanted to hear a less naive story from his wife. He sipped tea from a cup, and the woman opposite even said that perhaps she possessed the gift of telepathy if she suddenly found out that the prince would come to her. Despite this, the prince still played the role of a kind and courteous guy who looked at his wife with a smile and asked her if it seemed like she loved him very much if she saw him even in her dreams. And the equally smiling lady said that this was undoubtedly true. However, he suddenly ran his hand across the table so that it creaked, making him come closer to the main character and tell her something important. The thing is, he immediately stopped smiling and leaned closer to her to whisper in her ear that if she loved him so much, he wanted to ask her to never communicate with Malaya again. And this made Malaya in Psyche's body fall silent. He also looked at her, not with all the severity, and said that he knew that she had written a letter to someone with the words that she was now in Polly's mansion. And the guy began to ask the bride if she was familiar with these words. But the harbor heroine, fully aware that she had to continue playing the role of Psyche, decided to shamefully lower her head and cover her face, although in fact she understood everything perfectly well, having noticed in advance the close surveillance of the prince's spies, which would have been difficult not to notice. She remembers how, during one of her walks, she simply turned around, but behind her she could already make out the silhouettes of other butlers and servants who were closely watching her. And the moment the prince appeared, they mysteriously disappeared. The girl, who seemed smiling and sweet, was actually the evil and insidious Malaya at heart, thinking that if the prince's spies did not see Psyche as a threat, but were simply watching her, she could use this to her advantage. And so the girl already knew what to answer the prince. After some time, a reply came from the house of Mark Helio, which said that Lady Malaya wanted to renew her friendship with her, and, as proof, the Marquis gave her a letter containing a fragment of their friendly correspondence. The letter the prince read actually only said that Psyche wanted to make peace with her old friend, and this was precisely what had angered the aristocrat. The girls had also recently wanted to meet secretly, but Psyche, in Malaya's body, had to flee and hide when the prince suddenly arrived. So now, when the lady looks at the prince with a false smile, she said that she sent Lady Malaya another letter refusing her friendship. But in fact, everything is not so, because the ladies actually agreed to meet and discuss everything at the current royal banquet. Looking at the prince, who was listening to her attentively and sitting next to her, the girl kept saying that she was like a real fool who thought that her husband would not find out anything. But now he knew even more, and she pretended that she was not only sad, but also upset. After hearing the whole story from the main character, which was actually a complete lie, he decided to calmly get up from his seat in order to approach the bride. And the protagonist was very surprised by the fact that the young man sweetly hugged her shoulders, admitting that he had never thought of her in such a way, and Malaya herself, in Psyche's body, was stunned into silence at that time. He even decided to kiss her on the forehead, saying that he was only worried about her and wanted to take care of her, but he didn't wish her any harm, which is why he was sometimes strict with her. And the blonde held back her tears and said that she appreciated his kindness. After this, the guy quickly ordered the servant to bring the jewelry, all the decorations and dresses that his bride would soon wear to the banquet. And the butler soon brought the aristocrats an unusually beautiful decoration made of gold and diamonds, which was intended only for big celebrations. Taking the decoration in his hands, the black-haired guy told the girl to give him her hand, and at first Malaya did not dare to extend her palm to him, but she did it anyway. And when the prince brought the golden, wide, and probably heavy decoration closer to the girl's hands, he paused for a moment, which is why Malaya did not understand what he was trying to achieve. But after a minute of examining it, he finally declared that everything was perfect. The thing is, he looked at the girl with a scary, clean, smooth, and fake smile, saying that such a large decoration could perfectly cover up bruises and wounds on her hands that might accidentally appear. The stunned and bewildered lady wondered what the prince meant, but when the heavy, cold handcuffs were placed on her hands, she realized with shock that the prince was ready to lock her in a dungeon simply because of suspicion. She looked at her seemingly beautiful, fragile hands with defeat and could not believe that her beloved had allowed himself to shackle her like a criminal, telling all the servants around that this woman was clearly planning another dirty trick. The prince looked at the servants and immediately ordered them to lock his bride in the basement and do everything to ensure that she could not get out of it and was under constant control, while the blonde herself, in amazement, did not understand what was happening. Immediately after this, the butler and the guards took the lady by the hand and led her away, leaving the main character to sadly turn around and call out for the prince, trying to figure out what was wrong, now with true emotions of fear and despair. But she was surprised when the guy suddenly grabbed her cheek and kindly said that he promised to let her out of the basement on the day of the great holiday, and he was doing all this only because he loved her. She looked into his seemingly pitiful and loving eyes, but still did not believe his words and feelings, wondering why he was ready to lock the man he loved in the basement and whether he loved her at all. Now the main character had only to look in shock at her hands, bound by chains, and search for answers. At what point did everything go wrong, and why did the prince allow himself to mock his future wife like that? In fact, the lady imagined Psyche in Malaya's body pestering her, thinking that she had made up the false story of friendship in case Psyche tried to talk to her, and the real Malaya in the blonde's body would be against it. What struck the heroine even more was that the nanny with gray hair, who was nearby, began to cry from misfortune, asking the heroine why she was disappointing the prince so much. And the blonde in response looked at her in amazement and already knew that there was no one in this house in their right mind who would look at the prince as a tyrant. As a result, the main character found herself locked in a gloomy but seemingly wealthy house from which she was unlikely to be able to escape. And the sweet life of a luxurious lady ended in an instant. Sometime later, the prince sat at his desk in his study and asked his servant whether he had treated his bride too harshly, considering that he had no other choice. Thinking only of Malaya, and as if already understanding that it was her soul that was chained in Psyche's body, the guy said that he was confident in his choice for the reason that Malaya was the most insidious and cunning villain who was best kept away from himself. And while the prince was still thinking about how best to deal with his bride and what would happen next, Malaya herself, in Psyche's body, looked back anxiously, realizing that now she was walking through rich and luxurious corridors, and now she was at risk of ending up in a dungeon. The prince knew that one single line in the letter from Psyche, his bride, could squeeze her out. So the blonde, surrounded by maids, servants, and butlers, was already preparing to accept her fate with horror on her face. However, she was not going to give up even at this moment, Pomtau, when deep night had come and everyone was asleep, and above the palace there was only a dark sky and the moon. Someone was already preparing to sneak into the castle. The mysterious man, wanting to remain as unnoticed as possible, decided to climb a tree, carefully stepping onto the branches and approaching one window in order to also stealthily enter one of the rooms through it. At this moment, the main character, Psyche in the body of Malaya with black hair, was already about to go to bed. However, when she heard several knocks on the window, she turned around in surprise and wondered who it could be. A person or some kind of animal. A tree branch. And when the girl was already sure that the knocking on the window was due to a strong wind, Marcus Hell suddenly entered her room, took off his dark cloak, and was already heading towards the protagonist. The guy himself was very calm because he was looking at the dark interior of the room and thinking that his knocking on the window was a kind of sign that it was he who came to Malaya, because he always knocked before calmly entering the heroine's apartment, as he did now. However, now, when he looked at the surprised and anxious Malaya, who was covering her mouth in shock, clearly not expecting that someone would come to her, the guy clearly thought that in front of him was not the real Malaya, who had always known about their reception, but someone else. But the lady experienced an even greater shock when the white-haired guy appeared right in front of him and addressed her not as Melia, but as Psyche, which is why the heroine realized that she was exposed. And when she asked the guy with a trembling voice how he guessed about this, he calmly answered that he noticed strange things during training, and besides, the girl reacts very slowly for a true Melka. On this seemingly quiet night, when the crescent moon illuminated the earth, the astonished Psyche had to speak alone with the one whom she had not managed to deceive. But despite the fact that the young man could do something bad at any moment, which is what the black-haired lady was afraid of, The Marquis simply covered her with his cape so that the lady would not be cold, telling her that at the upcoming banquet there would be many acquaintances of the true Malaya, and this was a real problem for them. He also tells the heroine that he will teach her the behavior, manners, and even the vocabulary of Lady Malaya so that she can play her as realistically as possible. And when Psyche asks the guy why he is so kind to her, he answers that it is all because of Psyche, who, with a smile, ordered him in a letter to protect her. In a mysterious world where not only magic but also divine power exists, it is precisely this power that acts as the invisible support for the entire empire, which is why it is guarded as if it were held in one's hands and is constantly afraid of losing it. And the two branches of government that took control of it took the name Efferanto, as if it had belonged to them since birth, and one such branch is the royal family, responsible for expanding the empire in the political arena. And the second branch, controlling the holy power, is the Holy Church, striving to maintain stability within. These two factions became pillars, laying the foundation for further history, and the lands of the world are experiencing 2 springs and 2 winters, which signifies the blossoming of the world, and everyone is waiting for the moment when a new debutante will become a symbol of blooming trees and the beginning of something new. A particularly important day occurred 3 years ago, when an important banquet was held in a luxurious, unique hall, in which the guests were already gossiping about the fact that today was an important day, since the Count's daughter Polly was finally coming out into high society. Such people imagined a scary and crazy Psyche with long hair, spreading rumors that she, damn it, was not a child, but a real demon, whom the Countess gave birth to. And that is why the public now thinks that the Count hid his daughter from everyone because he cared about her, but if you believe this theory, everything is not so. And 3 years ago, when Lady Malaya, on the contrary, enjoyed a great reputation in society and was respected by everyone, she was the center of attention. And that is why this time they asked her opinion. And these were the roles the girl had long before the current events, where the white-haired Psyche was denigrated even before her appearance in public. And Malaya was respected by everyone even when she was a young girl. Then the girl smiled and looked at Psyche with some cunning, telling everyone that she herself does not know whether it is true that Psyche is a demon, but she does not change this fact. And that is why she is afraid of the new aristocrat. Society never stopped talking about how families usually hide things from others that are better not for others to see. So it is quite possible that all the rumors are true. But when Malaya was sure that all attention would be focused on her, the aristocrats around suddenly turned their attention to one girl. Everyone was shocked and asking each other if that same Count Polly's daughter had come to them. And as the rumors spread more and more, that same lady in the yellow magical dress was already curtsying in front of everyone and wanting to introduce herself. Then the appearance of Psyche, who was surprising to everyone, became a shock and a collapse for the main character, which is why their feud began. But now that Psyche is in Malaya's body and is in a scary office with large stacks of books, she understands that their struggle has turned into something more. The thing is that the white-haired guy was sitting in front of her and telling her everything she needed to know in order to be like the true Malaya, and the desperate lady looked at the man, asking if she really would need to memorize all of this. And the Marquis answered her that it was necessary. The boy with violet eyes stared intently at Psyche in Malaya's body, wondering if she could play the real Malaya if he had to spend a long time teaching her behavior, knowledge, etiquette, and even various acquaintances with whom the Duchess knew before the body swap. Humanities, general erudition, political science, and much more are only the surface of what Psyche had to memorize. And the guy stared at the empty notebook for a long time, realizing that Psyche had absolutely no knowledge of anything, which made the situation worse. But when the guy remembered that very moment when the girl finally showed herself in a new way, yelled at him, and got angry during the tournament, hope appeared in his soul that the lady could be at least somewhat similar to Malaya. At that moment, when Malaya herself, in Psyche's body, found herself locked in a gray room, she looked towards the window and hoped that everything would work out and things would get better, which was what Hel and Psyche were thinking about, as they spent the night learning all the intricacies of how to be a true Malaya. And when Malaya was also wondering whether the prince was going to free her at all, the guy himself was calmly looking out the window, listening to information from the servant that it seemed that nothing suspicious was happening in the Duke's estate, that is, in Malaya's house. This only amused the cunning prince because he looked out the window with a smile and said that this time he would still play along with his wife, because he believed that having 2 suspicious individuals was better than one. Soon came the very day when all the aristocrats would arrive at the king's estate in expensive carriages just to congratulate the crown prince on his holiday, and also to see his wife, who would appear in public for the first time after the wedding. The first to arrive at the celebration was Marquis Hell, who was dressed in a luxurious white suit, and with a surprised face he was already looking at Psyche, because he saw her in a very strange image. Having called the girl's outfit extravagant, the guy looked closely at the lady in the pink dress and thereby surprised her. Psyche and Malaya's body did not think that even clothes would be taken into account by her friend, and he hinted to the girl that she did not need to wear bright clothes and attract attention to herself. They decided to hide in one of the corners, where a white-haired guy was fixing the main character's hair, and Psyche herself admitted that she had always looked forward to this evening, which was special for her, because last time her husband, the prince, was busy with some state affairs. And the lady with purple hair and eyes smiled, remembering the past and the agony of the marquis that the prince personally promised her to celebrate his birthday as a true holiday, to enjoy a family celebration. She even remembered the face of the handsome, black-haired prince, who at that moment was kissing her hand and saying that he promised to do everything so that next time the girl would not even be sad at the party. The couple walked together along the luxurious, chilled corridor and sang to themselves that they would always be together and would stand next to each other. But if Psyche had known that she would switch bodies with Melia, then she would not have been so happy. Meanwhile, Malaya herself recalled that when she was first taken to prison and her hands were tied with handcuffs, she expected to see something resembling a place of prayer or a real dungeon. But when she arrived, she realized that it was an ordinary closet, a utility room where they planned to keep her. She also noticed that the room looked like someone had lived there for a very long time. And she remembered the white-haired Psyche herself, who was sad and covered with a blanket in this place because the prince deliberately kept her here until the day of her debut came. Malaya, in Psyche's body, also remembered how the prince had not been afraid to put heavy handcuffs on her, which made the lady ask herself again how a kind and merciful prince could have treated the naive and beloved Psyche, who loved him sincerely, so terribly. She also recalled Yalos himself, his stern silhouette, dark hair, luxurious fur, and clothes, as if asking the prince how he could have found out about this room. But there was no time to think, because the prince's birthday had already arrived and the celebration was ceremoniously opening, and the most important imperial couple, Yalos and Psyche, were greeting the guests, although Malaya herself in Psyche's body was not as joyful and smiling as her husband. Absolutely all the guests applauded the aristocratic couple and overwhelmed them with celebration. Being in a luxurious hall with an unrivaled interior, a red carpet, and a high ceiling with numerous columns. Among them was already Psyche in the body of Malaya, who, having thrown a black fur over herself, was looking out for her friend and hoping to see her at least out of the corner of her eye, to understand if everything was okay with her and whether he could talk to her. She still saw Malaya in her body, standing next to the prince, like a true couple whom everyone applauded, looked at each with pride and generosity. And black-haired Psyche did not believe that now they had such different images. Psyche looked in shock at how Malaya seemed to be happy with everything, because she was smiling and showing everyone her joy, which made even the prince look at her with a satisfied smile. And every guest enthusiastically spoke about how this couple was perfect, radiating true love. Psyche looked at all this with shock and absolute confusion, not understanding why no one had noticed the substitution, why her beloved prince continued to pretend that everything was fine, although perhaps the girl was deliberately showing herself in all her glory in order to evoke the most disgusting feelings in Psyche's soul. Then the Marquis of Hell suddenly appeared and decided to calm the girl down and look at her, saying that she shouldn't give in to her emotions, because in such a place anyone would want to anger her with gossip and all sorts of words. And even now she was under complete surveillance. Leaning towards the lady, the white-haired, purple-eyed handsome man whispered to Psyche that she shouldn't forget everything he taught her so quickly, because today they would just have to silently observe what was happening so that no one would suspect. This is exactly what the heroine had to do, which is why she was already looking at the terrible picture of how her beloved prince, the husband to whom she could have become engaged, was about to dance with the fake Psyche, who was actually Malaya. The prince carefully took his wife by the hand and offered her the first dance at such a luxurious celebration. And the lady, of course, agreed, saying that now this day was entirely for them. But when a large golden decoration was already flaunted on her hand, she remembered that the prince could not be trusted, only played along, Soon the imperial couple began to dance, captivating everyone around them with their smooth movements, unique aura, and beautiful music, proving to everyone that they were the perfect couple. After a while, the prince looked at the girl in surprise and said that he was amazed that she had not yet stepped on his foot, which usually happened constantly. And the blonde responded with a slight smile, answering that she tried to dance as beautifully as possible. And while Malaya, in Psyche's body, continued to talk to the prince about how happy he looked today, and the prince only smiled contentedly and said that he was thinking of giving her a gift, the Marquis and Psyche were already visible behind them, watching everything from afar. Sometimes the golden-haired, cunning lady looked at the Marquis with Psyche, but still talked with the prince, who with a smile told the lady that with her appearance he learned what happiness is. Although Malaya in Psyche's body understood perfectly well that the guy was only trying to deceive her. And after the dancing and the gift-giving ceremony were over, Lei decided to get up from the side and go in an unknown direction, because the prince himself had gone somewhere when he was mysteriously informed that some important guests had arrived, and the golden-haired girl was looking away, precariously realizing that the Marquis was probably watching her. The Marquis urgently needed to speak with the true Malaya in Psyche's body, and so he hid from everyone, which surprised Psyche herself, who was on one of the floors and did not understand where her only partner had gone. And suddenly she heard an unknown voice of a lady not far from her. And when she turned around, she noticed a pink-haired lady with red eyes, who greeted her as if the true Malaya was convinced she was familiar with her. The ladies began their conversation by saying that the girl had confessed to the heroine that she should be concerned about the latest rumors, which stated that Lady Psyche was obsessed with an unhealthy crush on the prince, and that the pink-haired lady herself was the daughter of Count Sayre. Psyche remembered how the real Psyche had sometimes walked with Count Sayre's daughter, passing by the fountain, and in fact, this lady always followed Malaya, which sometimes irritated her, so the aristocrat ignored her. Psyche also remembers the very moment when she herself found herself completely wet, standing near a fountain, having previously unexpectedly fallen into it due to her own clumsiness. And then next to her was that very countess, who this time was smiling, as if mocking the girl, asking her if she didn't want to ask Lady Malaya for help, because she knew that their relationship had been ruined for a long time. Besides this, Psyche remembered her recent meeting with the Marquis, with whom she had sat in a dark office and who had told her about the Countess, saying that she was obsessed with the desire to gain at least some power, and therefore ready to commit the most unnatural and wrong actions. And while Psyche was preparing to deceive the Countess, Malaya herself in her body was on a lonely balcony, looking at the sky and talking to herself, saying that today it was a little windy than usual, and Malaya was also a little sad. She recalled the statue of an angel in her mind, realizing that the imperial family was closely connected with the Holy Church, and that this information was a well-guarded secret that only the imperial family itself knew about. And the lady herself, when she was in her body, could not even imagine this. The relationship between these two factions is currently at its worst, but there is still one reason why Yalos chose Lady Psyche as his wife, creating a magical couple with her. It was precisely that piece that the girl smelled and wanted to find, but she was suddenly interrupted by Marcus Hell, who found himself in a tree, and with the help of one branch, was already about to descend to the lady in order to quickly talk to her. The guy was able to calmly sit down on the balcony railing, and the surprised lady looked at him for a long time, not believing that they would talk for the first time in a long time when she remained in Psyche's body. Still, she was glad to see him, so she smiled sweetly, looking at her old friend and greeting him, admitting that they hadn't seen each other for a very long time. The guy held onto a branch with one hand to keep from falling, and when he heard Malaya's voice, her manner of speech, and familiar words from the girl, he realized that Malaya was definitely in front of him, just in a different body, which was unusual to see. Because of this, the boy with purple eyes looked at her with tears, admitting that he had been worried about her all this time and prayed that everything would be okay with her. And while the Marquis was meeting with Malaya, Psyche, in her own body, was already talking to some ladies, asking them about some rumors that Psyche had a passionate love for the prince in the autumn. When the gossip girls thought they could easily talk to Malaya, suddenly the black-haired lady in front of them looked at them with strange eyes and said that she would not turn a blind eye to such an impudent attitude towards herself, and she even admitted that she could cut their throats. Because of this, an awkward silence fell between the ladies, and everyone was afraid to speak to Psyche first. But suddenly, one of the noblewomen looked at her and said that Countess Sayra was simply not herself, which caused Lady Sarah herself to look at her with amazement and indignation behind her. And after the same white-haired lady had scolded her, saying that there was no point in making so much noise over some rumors, Psyche herself turned to another girl and learned from her that she had previously asked her to watch her words, but she had not listened to her. Now, when the heroine sees before her the uncertain countess who is trying to tell someone something, she understands that there was no need to even be afraid of her, because in comparison with her, there is something more terrifying. For example, the rumor that Malaya has truly fallen in love with her husband. And when the girl continued to think about something of her own, she suddenly heard the voices of the maids behind her, who were asking each other where the prince had gone and whether he had gone out to get some fresh air. This made Psyche even sadder because she remembered how her husband smiled with Malaya in her body and seemed to look completely happy. She doesn't even remember Yalo smiling like that with her. The realization of this shocked the girl so much that for a moment she forgot how to breathe, parting her lips and asking herself why at such moments she showed pride and arrogance, although this was completely unlike her. And at that moment, when the lady was wondering why she should live as Lady Malaya at all, a servant appeared nearby, calling her and was already afraid that something was wrong with her. But the lady only wanted to be alone with the soda. She decided to get away from the noise and so found herself in the fresh air, still in the beautiful high castle, above which the Timoan, a blue sky with thick clouds, was pushing. While on the balcony, she bent down and took deep breaths to calm herself down. But her head was still filled with sad thoughts about why she had to play the role of an evil mistress when it wasn't really my place to even scold the servants. However, she still began to cry, remembering the happy, smiling Yallows and realizing that today, it seemed, she could never again feel his love and warmth. All because of Malaya, her revenge and desire to quickly take away her happiness. Because of this, the lady sadly sat down near the wall and did not stop crying, begging God to stop mocking her as if all this was his worst joke, which transferred her to something terrible and nightmarish. She felt big drops of water running down her face as she begged everyone to wake her up, as if it was a terrible dream and now she wanted her real soul to return to her body. And while Psyche and Malaya's body didn't know what to do and wanted all this to end as quickly as possible, warriors armed with swords had already gathered in a dark room, preparing to listen to their master's orders. The Lord, in turn, counted each one and carefully watched each knight, while they all bowed to him and prepared to listen to one, but important order from him. And that man turned out to be a black-haired, self-confident prince who called out each one by number and was glad that they were all there, while each of the 5 warriors stood before him. He explained that they were members of an elite knightly order that the imperial family had cultivated for many years, and that their current goal was very small, but very important, because the smiling prince looked at everyone with a smile and ordered them to bring him the head of Princess Psyche. The prince continued to laugh, looking at everyone with a satisfied grin and asking each knight what idiot would dare to blame him for Psyche's death if he was her beloved husband, and he was sure that no one would believe that the crown prince ordered his own servants to kill his wife on his birthday. He remembered the majestic castle of the empire, which would soon be entirely his, and the prince proudly told the soldiers that all he could do was play the role of a victim who had lost a loved one, because no one would even think that it was he who had taken her life. And while the prince was about to do something terrible and unimaginable, Malaya herself, in the body of Psyche, was still on the balcony with the marquises and was talking to him about how if she did not marry the prince within a year, on the next day of prayer she would again find herself in her body. At this time, the amorous Hel looked at her and was glad that everything was fine with the girl. And the lady also told him that if nothing changed for them that day, most likely, she would never return to her own body. But she did not talk about what things she experienced in the basement of the palace. And when the girl was thinking that the Marquise should definitely find out something from Psyche regarding Yalos, who was clearly hiding something, suddenly they both heard someone coming and the white-haired guy realized with shock that he needed to hide quickly. As he was about to leave, so that no one would suspect them of anything, the boy turned to Malaya in Psyche's body and said that before he left, he wanted to tell her something very important. He said that this would be a small gift for her. And it was this gift, wrapped in a red handkerchief, that Hel handed to the main character. And she, in turn, already wanted to see what it was. And when she did it, she realized that the Marquis knew her too well and therefore gave her something unusual, which she was already hiding from others in her sleeve with a smile, while one warrior appeared behind her, addressing her. And Hel himself was already hiding in the branches of the trees. The Marquise recalled the silhouette of the new Pishea with the soul of Malaya and understood that even if she were in absolutely any body, he would still serve her and respect her, even if it was very difficult for them. A minute later, the guy decided to return to the main hall, where there was still music, guests, and dancing, but he looked out for Psyche and Malaya's body in the crowd, not understanding where she could have gone in such a short time. But to his regret, he never found the one he was supposed to look after. But instead of her, an intrusive countess with pink hair appeared, who began to smile at the Marquis and say that she wanted to ask him for one favor, because she knew that he was looking for his lady. The fact is that when the couple was strolling through the luxurious interior, the girl said that she had recently been careless enough to say a couple of awkward phrases to Lady Miley, which could clearly offend and anger her, and therefore she asked the Marquis to talk to her about it. It seems that the Marquis was not interested in all this, but he still remembered the girl's words, after which he asked the lady where exactly Malaya had gone, and she, in turn, pointed him in some direction. And as soon as the lady wanted to thank the Marquis for the conversation, he not only began to listen to her, but also poked her, without even looking in her direction and not going to apologize, as if he only needed Malaya, and he was not going to waste time on anyone else. While the Marquis was already intending to find the main character, the true Malaya, in the body of Psyche, was already in an unknown area where there were only dark trees, various vegetation, and the light came only from the night sky. The girl, playing the role of a naive, clueless lady, walked ahead of everyone and looked into the distance, asking the warriors if they had gone too far from the castle, while the knights behind them remained silent, clearly hiding the fact that they had come here only for her death. Suddenly shouting to the main character that they were simply following the prince's orders, one of the warriors immediately pounced on the lady with a sword and swung, causing the astonished main character, Ajin, to be unable to jump aside the first time. Noticing that Psyche, who had always been considered fragile and clumsy, was able to dodge such a shocking blow, Vion was incredibly surprised, but did not become Soibarlia, because he still held the sword in front of the lady, while she fell to her knees. Psyche herself, who was actually Malaya, looked at everyone with alarm and growing panic, asking the others what they were doing and how they were capable of this. But the warriors did not even try to explain everything to her, but only wanted to carry out the prince's orders. That's why one of the knights decided to shed blood first, thinking that it was strange that they decided to send a whole squad of fighters to kill one person, but he was confident that he would do the job as if at the snap of a finger. And while Malaya was in danger, the Marquis himself, as if sensing this, did not cease to be anxious, because he walked around the garden, the balcony, trying to find at least one of the ladies to make sure that everything was okay with them. He still managed to find Psyche and Malaya's body next to the wall, who was still crying, sitting on the floor and thinking about her problems. And the guy, wanting to support her, sat down next to her and began to peer at the crying girl. The Marquise and Psyche looked at the night sky and were silent, but the crying lady began to ask the guy with despair why she was so stupid and unhappy, if they even hinted at it and told her so many times. She even looked at him with a disappointed, desperate smile and said that she was already sure that the true Lady Malaya was ideal in everything, and she would not even come close to portraying her. In comparison to her, she was a real nonentity. The lady also remembered the prince, her beloved husband, confessing to the Marquis that Malaya in her body, like a true spy, the smartest woman, was not discovered even by the prince, who still does not even suspect that instead of his wife, in the body of Psyche, there is now his fragment. Looking at her hand, the girl with violet eyes smiled from hopelessness, from mockery of herself, telling the Marquis that very soon she would make a mistake and run away from everyone, losing once again because in this life only Malaya should win. The girl, with the Marquis by her side, asked the night sky, every star, and her friend himself whether she should destroy the entire plan that his rival had been building for a long time, or whether she should do everything as she saw fit. The Marquis decided to speak, telling Psyche that Malaya was not the kind of girl who was easily upset. But at that moment they had no idea that Malaya herself, in Psyche's body, was already in great danger, as a result of which a huge pool of blood was visible on the ground. The white-haired lady who was ordered to be killed was already completely covered in blood, and even her face was pale, yet red at the same time. Her gaze remained lifeless, and next to her was still the warrior who had decided to be the first to take her life. And while Malaya was dying, Psyche in her body, and the Marquis looking at the sky, the girl asked the guy in surprise if he was in love with Malaya, if he spoke about her like that. but the guy himself was in no hurry to answer, joking that it was a little strange for him to hear such words from Malaya herself. For hell, this topic turned out to be so touching and painful that he himself soon began to cry, and the first tear slowly rolled down his snow-white cheek in complete silence. He only informed the main character that the first snow of the year had begun, and when the lady raised her head, she actually saw large white flakes of snow that were slowly falling to the ground and swirling in the air. Psyche and the Marquis enjoyed the silence, and Medea did the same. But for the former, the peace was salvation and peace. But for the bloodied girl, it was the real end. The realization that her story was over. At that moment, the girl realized that she had become a Psyche. Perhaps not by the will of God, but only for the sake of this moment, when the lady warrior behind her was already calmly addressing the others and was confident that her comrade had been able to get rid of Psyche the first time. However, everything was completely wrong, because when they heard a strange noise nearby, they had to look in shock towards the aristocrat and the killer, not understanding what was going on and why their comrade had not yet returned to them. Imagine their surprise when the fragile, seemingly helpless Psyche did not die in the end, because the first to meet his terrible death was her own killer, who fell dead to the ground and no longer breathed, completely covered in blood. What frightened them even more was that immediately after this terrible moment, the girl's heart-rending and crazy laughter was heard in the forest, which caused many black crows to instantly fly out of the trees, because Medea is not as easy to kill as many thought, and all living things strive to leave this place, realizing that nothing good will happen here. They raised their heads and saw the standing silhouette of Psyche, who, although covered in blood, was still on her feet, laughing and saying that it was not her blood. And then the warriors realized that they had not been able to cope with the task from the prince the first time. The determined, brave, and crazy Malaya, in the body of Psyche, held a bloody blade before them, and it was this blade that the Marquis gave to the girl at the very last moment, when they were about to be separated because of the knights. The stunned warriors looked at the bloodied but smiling girl and could not understand how such a weak lady like Psyche could kill a professional fighter on the first try, and whether it was really her, because even the girl's behavior was very unlike her. Just as the warrior woman was about to shout to her comrades that they needed to keep their distance, Malaya herself suddenly pounced on her and delivered a swift blow with a dagger to the body, causing the unfortunate woman to feel unbearable pain and powerlessness. And the golden-haired girl herself looked at everyone with madness and asked who had given them the order to kill her, or whether they had simply decided to carry out the will of the crown prince. But the opponents were not going to give up so quickly. These were the very questions the girl asked the commander-in-chief and the other warriors, clarifying who they served and why they had decided to raise their hand against her. However, the knights were so shocked that they watched what was happening in shock and were afraid to move, watching as Psyche wounded their comrade. The blonde, in whose body was Malaya, strong and cunning, was about to tell everyone that if they were silent, she would quickly finish them off. But she heard in time that there was a warrior behind her who decided to pounce on her first, already about to take up his sword. It seemed that time even slowed down, because the warrior's blade was slowly being exposed from its sheath, and the knight was already sure that he would kill Medea in Psyche's body on the first try. But these were only his expectations, because the girl, like a true warrior, instantly turned around and blocked his blow with her own dagger, which even caused sparks and magical splashes to appear. The girl's strength was not limitless because she still retreated, because the warrior was able to push her further away, which caused Malaya to crash into a tree and feel unbearable pain for a second. And while the white-haired lady was getting back on her feet and coming to her senses, the two knights in front of her, including the commander-in-chief, were breathing very hard, and she even grabbed her throat, realizing that her opponent had managed to cut her. The stunned girl held her throat very tightly and understood that Psyche, who at first seemed weak and powerless in front of everyone, was going to kill them in one go. And this time she was just lucky that she managed to dodge her fatal blow. And when the warrior woman thought about how she had previously greatly underestimated her opponent, Malaya's body and Psyche's body thought that in front of them were not ordinary soldiers either, but real killers who wanted to take her life, and therefore the battle was just beginning. And at that moment, when snowflakes continued to fall from the sky, slowly circling in the air, Malaya thought with pride that the warriors were sure that she would be weak, because she had never held a weapon in her life. But at that moment, the world seemed to turn upside down. She also kept watching them, their composure and readiness to attack with swords in their hands. And this helped the heroine understand that despite the suddenness of what happened, they were able to pull themselves together and act without panic. At this opportune moment, the commander-in-chief decided to shout to her colleagues that they should be very careful, and she also advised them not to see Psyche as a simple girl, but as a powerful adversary who must be eliminated immediately. This was heard not only by the warriors, but also by Malaya herself in the body of Psyche, who still held the knife in her hands and looked at them with shock, but still knew that she could kill them as easily as she had done with other enemies before. However, she felt her thin hands shaking, and she understood that she was not in her own body, and therefore she needed to be extremely careful so that the body she had moved into would not allow her to lose. While Malaya was getting ready to fight the crowd of warriors, the prince was celebrating at the festival in a spacious hall where servants were already approaching him and preparing to say something important with a smile. As it turned out, there was a certain aristocrat in front of him who immediately bowed to the prince and said that he had heard that he had inherited the kingdom of Henel, and he in turn replied that he was only here to congratulate him on his 21st birthday. But for Prince Yalos, this was completely unimportant, because sometimes he looked around with a satisfied smile, and when he did not notice his wife Psyche at the celebration, he was glad, because he was already sure that she had died and the soldiers had carried out his order. Noticing the prince's contented face, the aristocrat next to him admitted that he had never seen him so happy, and the crown prince himself said with a smile that on such an important day he could not be sad. That's why he was always smiling. The guy remembered what his beautiful palace with a red roof looked like, which, they say, could reach the sky, and the thought that now even his own wife would not cause him problems only made him happy. But he did not think that everything was much worse. And while the prince was in the hall, Psyche, in the body of Malaya, walked through the garden with the white-haired marquis feeling sad, and the guy promised her that after he lost sight of her once, he would no longer leave her side, so as not to lose her. Hel also tried to calm the girl down, admitting, as he thought, that Psyche was giving up too quickly and losing everything. But the black-haired girl still remained sadly silent and could not find an answer. However, when the guy asked Lydia if she envied Malaya for being better, more cunning, and more powerful than her, Psyche sadly recalled the moment when, it seemed, she first tried to get to know little Malaya, when they were in the rose garden. Then the girl, with a sad smile on her face, looked forward and asked the guy how she could not envy her, if in the end Malaya got everything and even more, having moved into her body. However, Psyche would certainly not envy her longtime friend in the sense that she still had to take blows and dodge the sharp swords of warriors, who were getting faster and stronger with each passing second, wanting to cut Malaya's throat. Malaya realized in time that she was not in her own body, but in Psyche's weak body. So she decided to dodge every blow, bend and slip away, just to find the right moment to attack. One warrior was very surprised that Psyche was still struggling and wanted to fight. And because of this, she even threw dry earth in their direction, just so that they would get confused and bewildered. But this only surprised and further infuriated the knights, who considered this act cowardly. And at the right moment, when the knight was sure that he needed to attack, since the girl was holding the blade in only one hand, he swung at Malaya and wanted to hit her on the head with the blade. But in the end, even now he was unable to kill the girl, because she grabbed her own weapon in time and after her own blow looked at the enemy with anger, saying that the only cowardly ones among them are themselves, who attack a defenseless lady. Just as Malaya was about to examine the knight's emblems, shocked to realize that they had no markings, making it difficult to determine which aristocrat they served, she was suddenly attacked by another warrior who was about to take her life. The stunned guy realized that he had also failed to carry out the attack. Then, gritting his teeth, he decided to protect all the most vital points on his body. For example, his lungs, chest, and neck, so that the agile woman could not kill him as well as his comrades. But even this idea did not help him save his life, because at the moment when he wanted to remove his hand, the girl's bloody palm hit him on the same hand, and he himself, holding the sword in his hands, realized too late that the blade was pointing in his direction. At that moment, the main character had to watch with indifference as the shocked Ares warrior felt pain and defeat, and the idea of defending her own body and engaging in hand-to-hand combat failed just as much as the idea of easily killing the prince's wife. The unbearable pain made the guy not only scream, but also throw his weapon to the ground, because he had already accepted his defeat, facing a terrible and painful death. The main character could only calmly pick up the sword of the dead warrior from the ground, already having a dagger with a blade with her, and the lady walked away from the scene of the incident, thinking that now she had only one path, or rather, the path to victory. However, even in such a calm moment, a dying warrior wanted to attack her, who did not want to accept defeat. And this time he was unable to finish what he started. But the imperturbable girl silently blocked his blow and was about to deliver her own. Malaya mercilessly and quickly ended his suffering, because the long sword pierced his chest right through to the heart, and the fair-haired knight breathed his last. This is exactly what the surviving knights saw, who were still watching what was happening and understood that if Psyche could easily deal with several men, she would kill them in a few moments. The commander-in-chief couldn't understand why some weakling had managed to easily deal with her team, and she recalled her past, the very moment when she first met the little prince and promised to protect him always, thereby creating an invincible order of knights. Understanding perfectly well that these were not just warriors, but people loyal to the prince, Psyche pointed her finger at them and said that she knew how devoted they were to the crown prince, so she would ask them about something one last time. Before them was a calm but completely bloodied girl with blonde hair, who, it seemed, was no longer the Psyche that everyone was used to seeing, because now they were seeing a stern and strong woman. And the swordswoman simply decided to engage in combat with the main character, fully aware that she herself seemed to already know the answers to her own guesses, even if they never told her the truth. And she herself, growing shallow in the body of Psyche, who was already preparing to fight the knights, remembered the very moment when she saw the light above, when she was drowning in a deep pool, and she sadly thought about why she began to hate Psyche in the first place, because of which the god, it seems, swapped their souls only so that now she would die in her place. However, the lady still swung her sword aggressively, wanting to kill everyone who attacked her, realizing that she didn't care about all this because she always believed in the fickleness of fate, that one day everything could turn around. Because of this, the girl remembered the early years of her life, when she was a very little girl with a short haircut, and when she just turned 8 years old, she was a naive and stupid child who loved toys, especially a teddy bear. The fact is that her mother had previously given her this cute teddy bear, but it was the maid who presented the gift, who showed the girl the charming toy, new and so cute that the future duchess could not resist it. She happily took it in her hands and looked at the maid with sweet eyes, asking her if her mother had given her this teddy bear, to which the maid replied that of course it was. The girl sweetly touched the girl's cheek and said that today was her birthday, and since her mom and dad couldn't come to her party, they decided to give her a teddy bear so that she wouldn't be upset and cry. And after that, the girl said goodbye to the little girl because it was late and she slowly closed the door, wishing Melia good night, because tomorrow important classes begin, for which she needs to be prepared. As soon as the maid walked away from the girl's door and made sure that she was asleep, a disgruntled maid appeared nearby, folded her arms and told her friend that doing something in the name of aristocrats was a great crime, because the girl decided to lie, saying that her parents wanted to give the little girl a teddy bear. The maid herself does not deny the fact that she arranged all this, because she remembers that earlier, having thrown a red cape over herself, she walked past the stalls with the toy in her hands, and the maid herself found out about this, said that she already understood that the teddy bear that was bought today at the market cannot be a gift from the girl's parents. The maid even asked the nanny if she was afraid that she would soon be kicked out of the palace for such a lie, but she only smiled, saying that if no one had caught her doing this yet, then she was not even considered a thief yet. The nanny also explained that if the parents did become interested in their daughter and where she got the toy, they would start asking questions. But now, when Malaya has to fall asleep alone and only dream about the love of her mom and dad, this is very unlikely. But the other maid wasn't going to agree because she was still indignant, asking her friend what she was worried about if the girl lived in a very rich family, in which she didn't even have to think about food or clothes, because everything was always ready for her. But the maid only replied that for such a girl, even a couple of kind words were incredibly important. Suddenly, when Malaya was still in class, books started flying around the room and encyclopedias fell on the floor, all because a certain woman was screaming and getting angry, asking the teacher why they decided to take up her time, considering some trivial thing to be an outstanding achievement. This is exactly what the red-haired DMA asked another woman, and the latter, being a teacher, explained that this literature is incredibly abstract, and as a rule, one can come closer to understanding it after reaching adulthood. And Malaya herself was next to her at that time and was silent. And the teacher kept saying that with her support they could achieve much more in their studies, even though the girl was only 8 years old. But Malaya was so unsure that she remained silent and was afraid of everything. As it turned out, the red-haired lady was the main character's mother, who quickly grabbed the girl's hand and told her not to be so impudent because anyone could succeed in their studies, including her young daughter. Having made her daughter take a closer look at the large bookcase with numerous books, Malaya's mother told her that she would have to learn everything she saw there, because she was to become a genius who would go down in history only thanks to some merit. Because of this, one day, when the maid tried to enter the main character's room, she was horrified because she noticed so many books that she could not see not only the girl herself, but also her room, because there were thousands of books. And only when she lowered her head, she was able to see the tired girl, who bowed her head down over another book, saying that this was still not enough. But the nanny was even more horrified by the fact that she saw blood on the white pages of the book. Touching the girl's cheek, the little girl looked at her, and the maid was shocked to notice that Malaya's nose was bleeding. But even now she spoke tiredly, saying that she needed to continue her studies and not stop in order to be worthy. The girl looked at the girl with alarm and real shock, not believing that even at some point she was thinking not about herself, but about her parents, who might be upset because she had gotten into trouble. And also, little Malaya did not want her to bother them with trifles, which touched the nanny so much that she began to cry. Looking at the window, from which warm, sunny light was pouring, the maid told the little girl that she now had a fever, and also advised Malaya not to overexert herself. Try to pay more attention to herself, because she was young. This is exactly how the main character spent her childhood, when she could easily pick up a sword, kill a villager, read any book in the shortest time. But it was love that was the most difficult test for her, which she could not overcome. And 2 years later, when the lady's carriage was heading to a certain place, something unusual happened. The girl looked at the scenery around her with a smile, realizing that even though she had gone for a walk with her dad, who had to go somewhere for work, she was still glad that she was accompanying her father on a business trip. However, while the little lady was looking out the window and not yet thinking about anything, her father was sitting next to her and coughing into his hands, about to tell his colleague something important, calling it a small problem. He looked at the teacher with his black eyes and said that since this year had not provided very good weather conditions, maintaining the supply and demand for food was becoming more difficult, and he had already tried to contact the temple to resolve the issue. But the issue was still complex, and because of this, it would not be easy. Suddenly, the solution to the problem was offered not by the Duke's interlocutor, but by his clever daughter, who looked at her father with faith and inspiration, suggesting trading goods with neighboring territories, which was a rather good solution. She even asked her dad if they were near the border, which made the smiling dad become interested in the little girl's idea, looking at her with some pride and interest. The girl imagined knights, telling her father that in exchange for food, knights could be sent out, who could eventually receive practical training, and they, in turn, would receive the necessary food. The girl's teacher liked this idea so much that she began clapping her hands, saying that only a smart child could come up with something like this. But the black-haired little girl remained silent, looking at the woman with surprise. But that same evening, when the trip was over and the Duke was sitting quietly in his office, the butler was in front of him and asked what he would order to do. And the aristocrat thought that even his daughter turned out to be smarter than he, who did not immediately guess to use her tactics. However, in the end, he looked at the butler with a devastated look and ordered him to contact the Margrave in order to carry out his daughter's plan. But the fact that his daughter was now much smarter than him still did not give him peace. And, as expected, the following year they were able to calmly survive the famine, without even feeling it, thanks to which every day was bright and clear, and nature brought joy to everyone around. That year, the heroine's father was even awarded a certain reward, and thanks to his thoughtful decisions and victory over famine, which took place in a luxurious palace, and also thanks to the fact that the Duke redirected the knights to a neighboring country, he was able to protect the kingdom, which was under attack. Thanks to this, Malaya gained great authority in the family and no longer seemed to be a burden, because after some time she was already dressing up in a light and expensive pink dress that her father had previously bought for her, wanting to give his daughter the best. There were several maids around the main character who were actively dressing Malaya and straightening her dress, and were also proud of her, saying that the Duke was very concerned about his daughter receiving all the best, which is why they praised her too. However, when one maid said that now the Duke not only manages his own lands, but also the empire, thanks to which he has become much smarter and more intelligent, the black-haired girl turned around in amazement and asked the maid what she meant. It was at that moment that the girl wondered why everyone was only talking about her father, while she, even after so many years, was surrounded only by dresses, useless jewelry, and any other clothing that most often ended up on the floor. And when the lady once found herself on the street, when her father told her in advance that she should get married because she was smart and clever, the girl already understood that all the glory went to her father, and no matter how hard she tried, she still could not seem to write her name into history. The father calmly looked at the landscape around him. While sitting on the bridge with his daughter and the maid, he told her that the ruler had already approved the future marriage, and therefore they only needed to wait for the date of the ceremony, and everything was already decided. Malaya, being in complete shock, would not decide anything. For the main character, this moment was like a dream, or a terrible nightmare from which she could no longer escape. So she faked a smile and only told her dad that she understood perfectly well how much he tried for her, although she was sure that this was not true. After this, the girl couldn't be herself, so she walked down the corridor with her own thoughts, because of which she didn't even hear the maid who was catching up with her from behind and asking her to wait, because she didn't understand what had happened. Even when the nanny caught up with her, the black-haired girl wanted to push her away with her hand. But in the end, all Avro heard from her were the words that she did not consider such actions of the Duke to be correct, and she did not like the fact that Malaya agreed with everything, and the maid's words made the lady think. The nanny even burst into tears, holding Malaya's hand as if it were the palm of her own dear child, whom she was afraid of losing, telling her that she also did not want her to become the crown princess or to move the Belial family towards prosperity, because she wanted her to know true happiness. The nanny's words struck the main character so much that she wanted to hug her, wrapping her arms around her body and confessing that she was the most amazing person of all, who took care of her and helped her in everything. However, Melia suddenly smiled, saying that it seemed like they were meant for each other, because the girl already understood that the status of the crown princess was much higher than that of the Duke, which her father had, and so she did not want to refuse the offer to become something more than a shadow of her parents. At that moment, the childish naivety of the girl, represented by the teddy bear, seemed to burn in the inhuman flames of reality, because Malaya realized that if her father was a cunning man who wanted to glorify his status, she would be no worse than him, and even better. And it was with these thoughts that the girl spoke with her father the next day and looked at the map, on which there were small ships to present some kind of political plan. And her father told her that the Hennel Empire had recently been openly expressing dissatisfaction with the agreement, which is why the ruler is now worried. The Duke sat calmly at the table, as if he wanted the daughter sitting opposite him to solve all his problems. Because this time, too, he simply explained the whole situation to her and then asked her opinion, expecting a quick solution to the problem. And the girl, wanting to prove herself and go her own way, told her father that she would first make concessions and then attack the enemy from the east in order to be as unexpected as possible. And the girl said this with angry and crazy red eyes. But one day, on a walk, when Malaya stood among beautiful roses while the maids were next to her, the girl already felt that she would meet the man who would change her life in the future. That person was Psyche, who was like a ray of light among everything else, because her golden hair, green, bright eyes, and bright smile could amaze absolutely anyone. And Psyche listened with curiosity from the girls standing nearby, who were calmly talking about how Lady Malaya would become the crown princess in the future, and this would make their empire even more powerful and prosperous. Although at the same time, they considered Malaya to be terrifying. Because of this, Psyche imagined Malaya not just as a girl, but as a proud and confident future aristosattva, who would be able to bring to their knees not only certain rulers, but also neighboring countries. Psyche became so interested in Malaya that even when the black-haired girl was nearby and talking to someone, she was near her and hiding behind a tree, trying to at least see Malaya for a moment. She even hid in the bushes in order to be as unnoticeable as possible. But Malaya herself was smiling because she felt that the blonde was watching her even when she was walking through the garden with the others. And even when Malaya was in her dark high palace, she told her friend everything. She slowly and calmly adjusted her hair and told the Marquis that Psyche had the opportunity to simply talk to her, but instead she only hid, continuing her stupid surveillance for the 10th day in a row, which is why she suspected her of some terrible plans. Malaya confessed to the Marquis that at the debutante ball she clearly noticed that the blonde was watching her closely from behind the bushes, while simultaneously stroking the cat, and she simply looked at Malaya, not yet wanting to meet her. But Marquis Hell only calmly helped the main character straighten her clothes, telling her that Psyche's uncertainty was very suspicious. But one couldn't help but think that everyone around her now wanted to meet her, because she was the future crown princess. And when the guy calmly straightened the girl's dress, Malaya herself admitted that these zealousnesses would cease when rumors about her personality reached the ears of those who move in high society all the time. One day, when Malaya was walking in the garden, she noticed a man nearby who was turning to Psyche, saying that she had been standing out a lot lately, especially against the background of Malaya, who were like the sun and the moon. Deciding not to reveal her presence for a moment, the girl hid behind a wall not far from them, peeking out from behind it in order to continue watching how the two guys mocked Psyche, calling Malaya a true demon, and her an angel, who could not be compared. However, Malaya decided that the conversation wasn't particularly interesting, especially since she didn't want to be a witness to something secret. So the girl with the crane calmly turned around and left, while the pushy guys were already offering the frightened Psyche to go with them to some event. But suddenly the blonde sternly asked to apologize to Lady Malaya right now, which made the two guys surprised, asking what was wrong. But the white-haired heroine was not going to back down, much less allow strangers to insult Malaya behind her back. Psyche was so angry with them that she looked at each of them with malice and confessed that for such terrible words they should immediately ask her for forgiveness right now, because in fact they knew nothing about her. The guy, stunned by this behavior, considering it impudence on the part of the lady, decided to teach Psyche a lesson and hit her on the cheek with such force that the girl almost fell to the ground. As it turned out, the man even wanted to punch the defenseless girl in the face. But he couldn't do it because Malaya suddenly appeared behind him, grabbed his wrist and said menacingly that it seemed like they were raised like a fool if they allowed themselves to do such a thing. Immediately after this, Malaya, angry at the guys, grabbed one of the strangers by the hair and forced him to hit his head against the wall so hard that his friend was frightened. And the dull crunch meant that soon there would be traces of blood on the ground. This is exactly what happened, as large splashes of blood instantly appeared in the air, scaring not only the other offender but also Psyche, who had no intention of harming the bullies. A few seconds later, the girls were already standing next to the lifeless body of the guy, who was breathing with difficulty and did not get up again, and a large pool of blood was visible on the wall itself. And the guy himself, who was in league with the offender, hurried to get stung by Malaya and Pishea with such fear that he screamed and turned around, as if afraid that he would be the next one whom Malaya would want to punish by hitting against the wall. But Pish, whose face already showed a red wound from a strong blow, looked not at the one who had suffered it, but only at Malaya, who suddenly appeared right in front of her and protected her from the stranger. Not intending to be gentle with the blonde either, Malaya grabbed her wrist tightly and explained that such a fragile and naive girl like her could easily become a target for ill-wishers like those men. Without letting go of her hand, Malaya calmly looked at Psyche, while she clearly felt discomfort, grieving as if at first she thought that there was some kind of catch in her weakness and defenselessness, which is why she did not want to get to know her. But then she realized that everything was not so. They were in a beautiful garden with tall, lush trees, where Malaya explained to Psyche that the man who attacked her was known for his bad inclinations, and therefore everything could have ended even more tragically, and it would be better for her to simply agree with his words, rather than resist or argue. However, Psyche only burst into tears, looked at her friend and asked her why she spoke as if she did not care at all what others said about her, especially when the people around her were ready to call her a demon, which was unfair and unjustified. At that moment, Malaya realized that Psyche's kindness and sincerity would definitely not leave her alone and would not allow her to forget all of this. Thanks to which, even being in her own dark and grandiose palace, she thought about what had happened. Malaya was in her dark room, silent and thinking about something of her own, when the nanny helped her put on her fur coat and asked if she was going to meet Lady Psyche again. Looking at the nanny, Malaya explained that she was meeting with her again, perhaps only because of her whining and reproaches. But the nanny laughed in response, which aroused the interest of the black-haired girl, and she asked why she found it funny. Malaya also confessed to the nanny that every day she found in her an increasing resemblance to Psyche, which is why the maid herself smiled, asking the aristocrat if this was true, saying that she was now sure that before her was not a child, but a grown lady. After some time, Malaya finally met Psyche, and the latter confessed to her friend that people were increasingly calling them a queen and a pawn, especially when they were close, which is why Malaya imagined the corresponding chess pieces in her head. The golden-haired lady laughed and admitted that they had a very long way to go if they did meet. But the black-haired lady next to her asked her interlocutor in surprise if she knew how to play chess. And to this, the green-eyed lady responded not only with a warm smile, but also with a sincere answer, saying that in fact she knows nothing about this game, or rather, her knowledge ends with the most ordinary piece, or more precisely, the pawn. After this, the girls decided to play chess, which is why they both looked at the pieces and prepared to start the game. And Malaya prepared to teach Psyche everything that was most important. The first to move was Malaya herself, who with a calm face took a pawn in her hands and placed it forward, saying that her pawn goes first, and when it gets into enemy territory, it gets freedom. The girls sat at the table while Malaya continued to say that the bishop, queen, knight, and all the other chess pieces could easily use the pawn as a puppet that was constantly being controlled by someone. And the golden-haired lady looked at her friend with complete surprise when she said that anyone can use the skin of a pawn in order to fulfill its role for something and thereby divert suspicion from themselves. Psyche understood the whole conversation as well as possible, so she could not hold back her tears, realizing that all these words were about her. And Malaya hastened to calm her down, saying that she did not expect to see her tears and was also about to hug her. The pawn and queen pieces lay on the table as calmly as Malaya and Psyche, who were like copies of pieces that seemed to be enemies, but unexpectedly, even for themselves, they became friends. But everything was not so good. The thing is that one day Malaya's father, along with his red-haired wife, shouted in shock, saying that the engagement that was supposed to happen to Malaya was suddenly broken off, and even the ruler was shocked by this and didn't know the reason for it. The father also told his wife that the crown prince suddenly wanted not only to marry Malaya, but to start an incomprehensible fight for the title of crown princess, in order to then independently choose a match and a wife for himself. And Malaya, who was near the door, overheard this. And now, remembering that very warm day when the sun sank lower and lower and a red sunset adorned the sky, Malaya understands that it seems that this very moment was a turning point not only in her life, but also in the life of Psyche. Now, when late in the evening, a great many noble guests had gathered in the imperial castle just to celebrate the prince's birthday, Psyche was still in Melanie's body. Psyche looked around with alarm at everyone and seemed not to believe that this was real, because all the aristocrats laughed, continuing the celebration, not even suspecting that something amazing had happened. Many of the guests present at the celebration talked about a variety of things. For example, about how the guest had come to their castle for him, what delicious wine the prince had given them, and how today he had congratulated them and invited them to celebrate. And Psyche in Malaya's body thought that everything would be fine, if nothing had changed in such a long time and everything was quite calm. But when she looked at the anxious Marquis, thinking that she would be calmer with him, she realized that something was wrong. The white-haired boy immediately grabbed his face and jerked, and Psyche, not understanding what was going on, immediately took his hand and asked what was wrong, because judging by his behavior, something had shocked him so much that he almost fell to the floor. The thing is that the Marquis was staring intently at the prince, who was standing not far from them, and fearfully asking his friend why he was still here, and alone at that, at the celebration without his wife, which was incredibly suspicious. A memory flashed through his mind that he had recently witnessed with his own ears the crown prince inviting Lady Malaya to a private conversation in the garden, which is why the commander-in-chief appeared behind the lady. And what frightened the Marquis even more was that Malaya had recently hinted to him with a smile that the prince had something in mind. The guy, with shock on his face, told the girl that Malaya was in danger right now, because only now did he realize that his master in Psyche's body had noticed the danger in the face of the crown prince in advance. Suddenly, the Marquis moved forward and did not even look at Psyche, which caused her to look at him in bewilderment and ask what was wrong. But the guy still moved forward, intending to save Malaya, who was now probably in danger. The thing is that the guy was walking quickly through the very garden where the meeting of the crown prince and his wife was supposed to take place. However, despite the darkness and some buildings, it was very quiet and it seemed like there was no one in the garden. While a tear rolled down Hel's cheek, he calmly walked on and peered intently into every bush and tree, fully understanding that it was still unknown what danger Lady Malaya in Psyche's body was in, but he needed to hurry before it was too late. He even remembers little Malaya, whom he met for the first time in childhood, sweet and kind, and how he vowed to himself to become stronger, realizing that because of a bad feeling, he is afraid that he can lose her and find her only dead, which is his greatest fear. The Marquis, with despair on his face, said that if he failed to save Malaya this time, he would never forgive himself, because everything that had happened before would no longer be important. But suddenly the guy heard a female voice behind him. And while the Marquis was muttering, Psyche appeared behind him in the body of Malaya, who had been running after him all this time and saying that she would not let him escape this time. But Hel himself felt such great panic that he did not hear her and muttered something to himself. He only said that he had to find the place in the garden where the prince had invited Medea to meet. And because of this, the black-haired lady looked at him with bewilderment, but she knew that he was very worried about Malaya. And the problem in the search was aggravated by the fact that there were actually 12 gardens around the castle, and you had to go around them all to try to find the girl. Imagining a terrifying castle under the moonlight, the girl explained that she had long been familiar with the structure of the palace and the court gardens, so the Marquis simply needed to trust her and run in the right direction, where Psyche would point. Looking at him with determination, she said that she had known for much longer than he thought, but still did not understand why he had become so nervous if everything could still be changed. And the words of the confident Psyche surprised Hel. She even put her hands on her cleavage and said that he had to believe her if he wanted to get to Malaya as quickly as possible. And at that moment, Hel realized that such a girl needed to be trusted. And while Psyche was telling the Marquis that she knew exactly which garden Malaya was in, because Psyche in her body was familiar with the castle, a terrible battle was already taking place in the garden itself, causing splashes of blood to fly into the air. Malaya, in her friend's fragile body, held a long sword in her hands and prepared to deal with her last rival, smilingly asking her why she had not yet attacked, but was only watching everything from afar. The commander-in-chief, in turn, was already preparing her sword for the Tataka, when Malaya still laughed at her, saying that it seemed she was scared, left without friends, whom she killed with one blow. And even when she pounced on her opponent, repelling her attack with such force that the knight flew to the side. But at that time, Malaya, in the weak body of the Pisceia Prakarsin, understood that her enemy had the advantage. Because in fact, that girl had been standing at a distance all this time in order to assess the situation and Malaya's strength. But suddenly, when the fair-haired girl was about to end everything and deliver the blow that would end her opponent's life, Medea felt a strong pain in her right shoulder, and earlier she had heard a sharp crunch, which indicated a fracture, since Psyche's weak body was still not capable of withstanding battle. At that moment, the girl even wondered whether she would be able to survive her rival's attack if she had already broken her shoulder, having endured all the pain up to that point. However, in the distant past, when there were no bloody battles, there was a beautiful, beautiful sky above the garden, and white sparrows sat and sang in the trees. The girl was in one of the bright rooms of a luxurious palace, which even from the window looked beautiful and elegant, and the lady herself was lying in bed and gradually waking up, as if after a nightmare. The golden-haired girl lay in a snow-white bed and seemed to be smiling when the maid was already nearby, and calling her to wake up her mistress. It was the gray-haired nanny who looked at the sweet, sleeping girl and asked her to wake up quickly. But the mistress muttered something like, "Let her sleep for 5 more minutes." And to this, the servant replied, "It's time to start the day already." The servant also kept an eye on what the heroine was supposed to read soon, or rather, on the letter that was on the table nearby, telling her that she needed to open a message sent from the imperial palace itself. And when the girl quickly stood up to read the letter, she opened it and read that she, Psyche Polly, daughter of Count Polly, had been chosen as one of the candidates for the place of crown princess. And after some time, because of this shocking news, the golden-haired Psyche was already near Malaya, and smilingly told her that she did not believe it, and it seemed like some kind of joke, because the prince had already chosen a bride for himself in the form of Malaya. They were both sitting at the table and talking calmly, but at some point Malaya stopped talking, calmly sipping tea and thinking about everything they had to discuss. The golden-haired lady also reached for the hot tea and admitted to her friend that this was all extremely strange and illogical, since the rulers had decided to cancel Malaya's engagement to the prince without asking her family's opinion, in order to then organize an incomprehensible struggle for the position of crown princess. Psyche's hands trembled as she sincerely confessed to her friend that she had never even thought of claiming the title of the prince's bride, and that she would have preferred to marry the man she loved. But Malaya decided to calm her down by touching the cup in her hands. The black-haired lady took her friend's hand in hers and, looking into her eyes, calmed her with words and a promise that she would not have to become the crown princess, because she would take on this role and win the fight at any cost. Imagining a terrifying goat skull with large horns as a symbol of treachery, Malaya explained that it seemed the imperial family was deliberately trying to make them enemies and rivals, and there must have been some reason why they did this. Looking at her friend with a smile, Malaya asked Psyche why they couldn't perceive this situation not as a problem, but as an opportunity to become better, stronger, and more perfect, so that they could then overcome all obstacles with their heads held high. This made the sweet girl happy, so she also smiled at Malaya and said that she was right to forget about all the hardships that could make them weaker. In the Empire, large and filled with a wide variety of houses, everyone is already anticipating the start of the competition between the candidates for the position of Crown Princess and the Prince's legal wife, because the competition itself will consist of 3 competitions. The first thing, it would seem, is that girls should know so many topics and so many books that it would seem impossible to count them all, because all young ladies should be well educated and know all the intricacies of the internal and external affairs of the empire. The second competition involved establishing relations with a vassal who had long ago severed all ties with the imperial family and had become a hindrance to it. If the candidate succeeded in resolving this situation, she would return with a coat of arms, proving her success. And, as many thought, the first competition was easily won by Lady Malaya, who was already holding the required coat of arms in her hands with a smile, and showed it to them, intending to take it to the imperial family and thereby gain victory. Also next to her was Psyche, who was dressed in white, beautiful riding clothes, but she was so tired and exhausted that she leaned down and confessed to her friend with a smile that she didn't think she would be so nimble and strong. At this moment, the residents nearby were gossiping and saying that they had no doubt that Lady Malaya would win, but they still admitted to each other that they expected more from the candidates. They also looked at Malaya and Psyche, who were laughing and, it seemed, were not rivals to each other, but rejoiced at Malaya's victory and continued to talk, which is why even the local residents themselves believed in their friendship and supported them both. One couple looked at Malaya and Psyche and said with a smile that they had heard about the black-haired Lady Belial, who was a very famous and powerful aristocrat, but they were seeing Psyche for the first time, although they already called her an angel because of her behavior and appearance. Soon the final competition took place, for which the 2 girls had already prepared consciously, dressed in luxurious dresses, decorated with expensive stones and fabrics, and they also bowed to the one who was already in front of them. It seemed that someone very important was about to appear on the street, because even all the spectators of the battle were bowing to the ruler and waiting for his appearance, because this ruler is the emperor and his family. The black-haired man with a mustache, the emperor, looked at everyone present and solemnly proclaimed that, thanks to everyone gathered in this square, today the future of the Esperanto Empire would be decided and the time for the final test had come. Rising from his throne, the emperor began waving his arms and saying that the final test would be a speech that would demonstrate to the public their ideas dedicated to caring for the ordinary citizens of their precious empire, and that they should prove that they were worthy of becoming a member of the imperial family. And even when the emperor said that he already knew the winner, he still advised the participants to prepare before the final test. After which, the black-haired Malaya, smiling, agreed with the ruler, and Psyche, not far from her, also bowed, but remained silent. The white-haired girl, unsure of herself, raised her head slightly and looked at the crown prince, who was sitting on the throne next to his father, and did not believe that it was him, while the guy himself looked at everyone with pride and a satisfied smile. And it was she who began to speak first, although she was not confident. But she still looked at the prince and the emperor and said that she was the daughter of Count Polia. And although she did not have many people around her now, she wanted to propose an unusual policy to the empire concerning the support of the lower classes. When the white-haired girl explained that her idea was to help the poor and thereby make the empire even stronger and more fortified, the commoners looked at Psyche as a real angel who wanted to help them first and foremost, and of course they liked it. While Malaya understood that her friend's plan was in fact difficult to implement and expensive for the state budget, she looked at the emperor and his face, realizing that he too was not very fond of Psyche's idea. But as soon as the girl looked at the prince, she noticed his incredibly scary eyes, smile, and facial expression as he stared at Psyche, and seemed to be thinking about something crazy, and this made Malaya wonder what was wrong with him. And it was at that moment, when Psyche's speech ended and it was time for Malaya to speak, that she felt a little confused, but still prepared to begin speaking, for there were commoners around her, awaiting her statements with anticipation. Knowing full well that Prince Yalos had broken off their engagement on purpose to make enemies of her and Psyche, the girl motivated herself by saying that the moment for her victory had come. So she smiled sweetly and first of all greeted everyone present. Having begun to deliver a captivating speech that interested everyone much more, the girl looked at the audience, who were staring at her with enthusiasm, and realized that her words were already having an effect. And when the emperor joyfully realized that Malaya, an intelligent and promising girl, was telling everyone about the real problems of the empire and immediately offering solutions to them, he stood up from his seat and looked at Malaya with delight, saying that he had no doubt that the daughter of an outstanding duke would become no less worthy. Everyone was near the large imperial palace and was anticipating Malaya's victory. And the girl herself believed that she was about to win, because she had won every competition, which meant that the prince would undoubtedly like her. The common people, women and men, rejoiced at Malaya's imminent victory and spoke enthusiastically among themselves about how the black-haired girl was about to win, since she had been worthy of it from the very beginning. But suddenly a certain lady with dark hair and a hat appeared, who addressed all the people, asking everyone in what position Lady Psyche would find herself after this, and why this event was held at all if Malaya had defeated everyone again. The same woman, appearing in the crowd, began to explain to everyone that the policy proposed by Lady Malaya was aimed at the nobles, while Lady Psyche, in turn, was thinking about the commoners, which is what they needed to pay attention to. And many strangers actually began to doubt whether they should support only Malaya. And sometime after this, Malaya, Psyche, and also Marquis Hell were sitting in a spacious room, decorated with rich ornaments and chandeliers, while a maid stood next to them and poured tea into everyone's cups. Noticing something interesting, the woman looked at the company and stepped back a little, raising her hands as if she was going to make a kind of frame, like from under a painting. Looking at the aristocrats with curiosity and also raising her hand as if taking a picture of them all together, the maid thought that she was used to seeing Malaya and Hell together, which even now did not particularly surprise her. However, when she widened her field of view and noticed Psyche, who was also sitting next to them, she was surprised, realizing that now it was even more surprising to her to see the three of them together, in such strange but cozy company. Also noticing that Psyche had not touched her strawberry cake, which was on the table, the maid asked the blonde if she was hungry today, because for a long time she had not even tried dessert. The black-haired Malaya also spoke, looking at her friend and admitting that she thought Psyche was worried about something, but the white-haired lady only laughed modestly and sadly in response and apologized to everyone. Explaining her behavior by saying that she had to return home early today, the blonde stood up and immediately went to the exit, saying goodbye to everyone. But Hell also stood up, turning to Malaya and telling her not to worry, because he would take Psyche to the carriage. And Hell did indeed accompany Psyche to the carriage, after which the blonde boarded the vehicle and headed to her home, while the Marquise watched not only the sunset, but also how Malaya's friend drove away and gradually disappeared from sight. The maid appeared next to the guy and asked with a smile why he had only taken Psyche to the gate if he definitely hadn't intended to take her to the mansion. And to this, the white-haired Hell calmly replied that he wouldn't allow Malaya to waste her precious time on such trifles that he could do. Then the nanny asked the boy if he didn't trust Psyche, because it was too obvious. But Hell, standing next to the woman, also answered that she valued Lady Malaya just as much as he did, because the aristocrat was very important to him. The man with violet eyes looked at his hands and then at the sunset, talking to the nanny about how he respected Malaya too much and cared about her to allow a woman he considered suspicious to be around. Also, while the uncertain Psyche sat in the carriage and was clearly worried about something, Hell confessed to the nanny that he valued Malaya very much and could also advise Psyche to give up her friendship with his mistress if the opportunity presented itself, because she was suspicious. In response, the maid only laughed, looking at Hell and saying that only 2 years had passed since Psyche met Malaya, and Hell, in her opinion, behaved like a child, and the nanny's words shocked the guy. And the woman even stroked his head and smiled sweetly, admitting that he was a very good friend to Malaya, because he probably had good intuition and worried about her more than anyone else. And at that moment, Hell smiled sweetly, thanking the nanny for the warm words, thanks to which he even laughed in his soul. The Marquis's worries turned out to be true, because almost immediately after Psyche arrived home, she went into the garden late at night to meet an unknown man in a dark cloak. But the girl treated him politely and said that she already knew that he was there. In response, the stranger only laughed, telling the girl that he was sure that suspicions had arisen towards him. And to this, the blonde replied that of course she began to worry about him, especially from the moment she became a full-fledged candidate for the position of crown princess. And the girl, with a certain joy, with tears in her eyes, said that it was he who provided her with this status of princess. And at that moment, the stranger threw back his hood. The girl saw a smiling prince, cunning and contented, who told his friend that he was glad to see her here. The blonde sat down indignantly next to the prince, asking why he hid all the secrets from her. And even when the guy answered with a smile that he simply kept some details silent for a while, Psyche said that it was the same thing. Peehee admitted that she thought that if she had played all the competitions, she would have definitely lost, which is what she wanted. But now, when she sadly bowed her head down, she understands that everything is destroyed. Even when the prince wanted to calm the blonde down, she got furious and walked away from him, saying that everything wouldn't be so calm because now she had to deceive Lady Malaya. And she definitely didn't want to do that before. Enraged at his beloved, the guy angrily said through clenched teeth that she should always remember that he was her boyfriend, and that she should worry about him first and foremost, not her friend. And if she tried to resist, she would end up in the scary basement again, and the memories of the heavy chains that bound her made Psyche fall silent with fear. At that moment, a true fear of reliving her imprisonment in the prince's basement entered Psyche's eyes. And because of it, the girl was ready to do anything, just to avoid being trapped again, without food, water, communication, and freedom. The prince, who seemed to enjoy subjugating the naive Psyche, smiled and beckoned her to him with his hand, saying that she herself had told him that he had pulled her out of hell, and now she owed him no less help. He even asked the girl how she would live without him all this time. But Mother Psyche not only did not answer, but was as if in a fog, only submitting to the prince and falling into his arms, realizing that it would be very difficult for her to escape from his influence. And while Psyche was seemingly free, but at the same time could not allow herself to act as she wanted, Malaya was in her bedroom and, as if getting ready for bed, walked around the room in her nightgown, and also read a certain letter. Next to her, near the window, is the Marquis, reporting that, thanks to his investigation, he discovered that the prince had been secretly leaving the palace at night for some time, and these forays began from the moment of Psyche's debut in high society, which connects them both and this greatly shocked Malaya. But she still thought that it was a simple coincidence, because Malaya did not believe that her friend could have an alliance with the prince and thereby betray her. So she decided to burn the report, as well as her doubts. Soon, the day of the ceremony itself arrived, and Malaya was already preparing for it, because the maids were lingering around her, picking out dresses and jewelry, supporting Malaya, who was clearly thinking about something and was more serious than usual. The nanny even asked the girl if she was nervous, and when she told the heroine that she shouldn't waste her nerves in vain, because by the end of the day she would bake a delicious pumpkin pie for her, Malaya laughed and promised the nanny not to even think about anything bad. Immediately after this, Malaya moved towards the emperor's palace, and an hour later, 2 beautiful horses brought her carriage to its destination, stopped, and the lady herself was preparing to get out. But when Malaya and her dad got off the transport, they met a black-haired guy who introduced himself as a man from the Nota house, explaining that his duke wanted to send him a gift from his family. The man came closer to Malaya's father and showed him a beautiful necklace of rubies and gold, saying that they were giving him and his daughter such an expensive piece of jewelry as a sign of friendship, and also asking Malaya to wear this necklace in honor of the beginning of their union. But the Duke of Belial himself was in no hurry to rejoice. Telling the man that it was quite a nice gift for them, Duke Belial not only took the jewelry, but also dropped it on purpose, so that the priceless artifact of another family would shatter on the ground at their feet. As soon as the golden necklace fell to the ground, Medea's father began to trample it with his foot as if it were a mere trifle, and he spoke about this with a smile to the astonished man, saying that his family certainly did not need such a trifle. And he explained his behavior by the fact that when his daughter's engagement to the prince was tragically canceled, his Nota family was the first to turn away from them, which testified to their betrayal. After this, calling the Nota family's envoy shameless, the father led his daughter further towards the palace, closer to the ceremonial gates, where the long-awaited ceremony was to take place, thanks to which Malaya would finally become a princess. All the guests, including Duke Belial with his daughter Malaya, Psyche, and ordinary commoners, saw a holy man with a staff approaching them, who was walking towards them with a smile and was about to say the most important words. One of those present, a simple man with brown hair, spoke with surprise to the others about the fact that this time the Holy Father himself would conduct the ceremony, because it was a very important event. At that moment, Malaya, standing next to Psyche, wanted to whisper to her whether her assumptions about her relationship with the prince were really true. But the blonde herself interrupted her friend with a smile and said that none of this mattered, because she would accept defeat in any case. Then the black-haired Malaya seemed to be left completely alone with her thoughts, not imagining what would happen next. but still she asked Psyche for forgiveness in her thoughts in advance, because in any situation she would not have handed over the title of princess to her. The girl looked at the beautiful crown, realizing that she had sacrificed too much time to come to this and stand here in order to eventually receive the title of crown princess and achieve her main goal. And while the girl was reflecting on her successes, Kal was standing nearby in a hidden cloak, watching everything from afar in order to help Malaya at any moment and see with his own eyes how his mistress would become the princess of the empire. When the boy remembered Malaya's words about being extra vigilant that day, he noticed a strange woman in a black hat standing nearby and making the crowd increasingly nervous and rebellious because she was saying various things, like the winner of the competition was known from the very beginning. Looking at her more closely and noticing the stranger's blue eyes and red hair, Hel realized that he had seen her somewhere before. Especially he noticed that this time the girl was talking to everyone only to create doubts and indignation in society. He recalled that it was she who had been at a recent competition, where there were many commoners, including herself, who had spoken, for example, with one man, telling him about the kindness of Psyche, admitting that she was a real angel both in appearance and in soul. This same woman with red hair told everyone in a row that Lady Malaya's policy was aimed at the aristocracy, unlike Psyche's policy, because she, as a sincerely kind person, wants to help the poor and ordinary people in order to make the empire even stronger. Then, when the guy remembered that the same woman had made everyone think that Psyche was better than Malaya, Hel wondered why it was necessary to hold an event where girls demonstrated their political ideas in public. He was so indignant that he immediately approached the girl closer and grabbed her hand to call out. And this not only frightened the red-haired stranger, but also made her twitch so much that her dark hat fell off her head. And as soon as she turned around, Hel noticed the girl's blue eyes, her short, ruby hair, and the frightened expression on her face. But the mysterious lady did not say anything to him, getting ready to run. As Hel had expected, immediately after this the girl attempted to escape and did so very quickly and nimbly, so that other people did not have time to understand what had happened. But it immediately became clear to the Marquis that something was definitely wrong with this girl. And at the moment when everyone was expecting to hear the name of Malaya from the Holy Father, so that he would call her to him and conduct the ceremony of receiving the title of Crown Princess, the man with long hair and a smile suddenly said the name of Psyche. This shocked everyone without exception, including the commoners and the Marquis, who watched what was happening with their mouths open and did not know what to say. Because just a couple of minutes ago, they were all firmly convinced that Malaya would win and leave her friend no chance. But there was a catch here, too. Everyone was indignant and began to say that this was impossible, but Hel himself did not forget about the strange girl with red hair and white eyes, realizing that thanks to her striking appearance, the stranger would be easy to find. At the same time, not far from him, a man proclaimed to everyone that they should not condemn the choice of the Holy Father, because he knew more than them and Psyche was probably chosen by the gods themselves. This made everyone think, realizing that if the supreme spiritual ruler had chosen Psyche, then Lady Polly was truly worthy of being the crown princess. And the prince himself, acting as if all this had been planned, immediately approached the astonished Psyche and kissed her on the lips in front of everyone, as if deliberately showing his feelings for the blonde. The prince admitted that he was so touched by her speech during the final test that the thought arose in his head that she was the one who could look after the empire. And he also knelt down to confess something else important. The charismatic prince knelt before the surprised Psyche and kissed her hand, saying that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, as his beloved lover. But in reality, Yalos was only playing the role of a magnanimous seducer. The locals, noticing the couple, immediately rejoiced at this event and began congratulating Yalos and Psyche, while the emperor himself sat on the throne and only clutched his head, realizing that his son was much more cunning than he might seem. The emperor looked at the many people who were rejoicing, dancing, and congratulating each other on the celebration, and he understood that he would not be able to object to anything if his son had such support in the form of a large number of joyful residents. And at that moment, Malaya herself stood at a distance from what had happened, with great emptiness in her soul, because of which she could not even move, and therefore she only stared intently at her friend, not understanding how she could betray her and when everything went wrong. Malaya fearfully believed that Psyche could still voluntarily renounce the title of princess, but when she watched the blonde cry with happiness and rejoice at being reunited with her beloved, the brunette increasingly wondered why she had won. If she had been trying all this time and winning all the time, The astonished protagonist remembered only the moment when she taught her friend to play chess, telling her that a pawn is not just a puppet among other pieces, but a skin, someone who can try on any role. And it seems that this time Psyche chose the role of a princess. Malaya had to watch from afar as a beautiful crown with expensive jewelry was placed on Psyche's head, thus transferring her the title of princess, although all this time they had agreed on something completely different. Right before her eyes, a simple pawn in the person of Psyche became not just strong, but a queen with a staff and a crown, who greets every commoner with a smile and makes the prince standing next to her smile even more contentedly and sweetly. This stunned not only Malaya and all her supporters, but also her father, who had been standing nearby the whole time and watching everything with shocked silence and a blank expression on his face, causing Suga, who was nearby, to ask the aristocrat if everything was all right. He was so angry that when the ceremony ended and the Duke came home, he immediately beat Melly's nanny until she bled and made her fall to the floor, suspecting her of some kind of spying, and that it was she who prevented his daughter from receiving the title of princess. He looked at the maid with angry eyes and said that because of such a disgrace, he could not even look other aristocrats in the eyes. And all this time he was sure that the nanny's upbringing would make his daughter the best of the best. But at the most crucial moment, she was unable to become a princess. And when the Duke was telling the dying nanny through clenched teeth that she would accept the punishment instead of Malaya, the main character entered the room and, slowly opening the door, did not expect to see such a terrible picture. She seemed speechless, watching how her evil father, without holding back his anger, continued to beat the nanny until she bled and called her a nobody, destroying the only person for Malaya, the one who had supported her since birth. Noticing the appearance of the stunned girl, the nanny looked in her direction and wanted to say something, but was unable to do so, because the numerous bruises on her face and the pain throughout her body made her practically powerless. Despite everything, Malaya immediately rushed forward and shouted for the Pope to stop, but her path was immediately blocked by other servants, who began to push her away, saying that the Duke would get even more angry if she interfered. When tears appeared in her eyes, Malaya shouted to her father that they both should understand perfectly well that the further decision of the emperor and his prince cannot be changed, because punishing the nanny is useless. However, suddenly, just to stop her father, the girl fell to her knees and with a trembling voice admitted that it was all her fault, and this made the Duke stop, although he had already grabbed the nanny by the hair and was holding a cane in his hands to beat her. And this did not make the embittered Duke stop, so he swung at the maid, intending to kill her with a large stick, and the stunned Malaya realized that Psyche's one decision to become a princess turned into a terrible tragedy. Malaya didn't want to just watch her loved one being killed, so she immediately rushed to the nanny in order to hug her tightly and thereby save her from the blows. And after that, the girl felt severe pain and loss of consciousness. After some time, the black-haired lady was lying on the bed with a bandaged head, as if she was sleeping, and her father and mother were worried next to her, asking each other why Malaya had not woken up several days after what had happened. The main character's red-haired mother looked at her husband and said that, if she recalled the doctor's words, Malaya wasn't waking up more likely due to psychological shock than trauma. But then the woman whispered that it wasn't so important now, because it was time to get rid of the nanny's lifeless body. A day later, deep into the night, the servants were already pulling Yanni's body out of the dark sack and dragging her into the forest, remembering the words of the Duke and Duchess, saying that no one should know about what happened, because the maid was not only a servant but also the younger sister of a noblewoman, and if she saw the truth, they would definitely lose their reputation. When the soldiers were already mutilating the nanny's body with knives in their hands, the Duke and his wife concocted a false story, saying that the nanny had gone out for a walk to the city for groceries and was attacked by bandits there. But now Malaya's father's servants were carrying out his orders to hide the body in the forest. And while the boys were busy with terrible deeds, they didn't even suspect that the astonished Marquis of Hell was watching them all this time, sitting in a tree and secretly watching everything that the Knights of Duke Belial wanted. He could only watch with devastated eyes as the fighters prepared to throw Yanni's body off a large cliff, because if he tried to kill them, the Duke would immediately realize that she had done it and would declare war on his family. Holding back his anger and desire for revenge, the white-haired boy remembered with pain in his heart the moment when the nanny laughed at him and called him a child, which then struck him incredibly. But he had no idea then that this moment would become the most priceless memory associated with such a kind person as this woman. Still sitting on the tree, the boy asked himself whether he should do nothing now and watch what happened, so as not to create even more problems, or whether he had the right to punish everyone involved in the nanny's death. While the unsuspecting warriors at this time threw the woman's body off the steep ledge, being sure that no one saw them. But this is absolutely not the case. Looking at the woman's bloody body, at her empty, lifeless eyes, Hel did not believe that he would no longer be able to meet her in the mansion or hear her laughter, because now the nanny's body was slowly falling down, disappearing from the guy's field of vision. However, in Hel's warm memories, the nanny always remained a kind and sincere woman who certainly did not wish harm to anyone, serving in the hero's house honestly and selflessly, meeting the most terrible fate in the form of the aristocrat's unjust wrath. And while Hel couldn't cope with the loss of a loved one, the warriors calmly looked at the cliff and told each other that now they had to remember a fictitious story, that the nanny herself fell off the cliff while running away from the attackers. The knights left, but Hel stood silently in the forest for a long time and looked at the mountains, at the night sky, was silent and asked the gods why the nanny lost her life and why he now felt unbearable pain in his heart. Only after everything that had happened did Malaya finally wake up, slowly and weakly opening her eyes, which astonished every servant, and they immediately came to their senses, asking the girl how to help her and inquiring about her condition. But the heroine was thinking about only one thing. The worried maid smiled and asked the lady if she should bring her some water, because she had not felt well for a whole week. But Malaya only slowly got out of bed, remembering the events of the past and realizing that the nanny was no longer in her room. Malaya immediately asked the mustard woman what had happened to the nanny, and thanks to Hel, who knew the truth, a few hours later she was already with him in a spacious wheat field, and above them there was only a clear blue sky. Hel was sadly silent when the lady, sadly and devastated, squatted on the ground and looked at something, asking the guy if the capital's doctor, Sir Lemaire, could help the nanny if they called him. But the Marquis was silent, realizing that Malaya herself knew the answer perfectly well. In Malaya's soul, there was a sincere hope that her nanny could be saved and that not all was lost, which further upset the white-haired boy, who looked at everything with sadness and sorrow, because no magic could revive the dead. But Malaya still didn't stop asking Hel if they could help the nanny, hugging the woman's lifeless body as if she wanted to hear her heartbeat and pulse for a moment. But the black-haired girl had never heard either of them. In response, Malaya and Hel heard only silence, the singing of birds, and the wind that swayed the golden ears of grain and made the heroes understand that what had happened could not be changed, no matter how much they wanted it, even when the protagonist still hugged the nanny and wanted to hear at least one beat of her heart. As soon as the heroine realized that the nanny was no longer alive, she screamed hysterically, like an animal's roar, so loudly and tragically that the previously clear sky seemed to turn red and take on a bloody hue, perfectly conveying all of Malaya's mental pain. Malaya hysterically threw herself into the Marquis's arms and, with a crazy laugh, kept asking him why Psyche Polly still hadn't renounced her title of princess after what had happened, why she had betrayed them, and how they were supposed to live now. The girl squeezed Hel's shoulder tightly with her hand, telling him that from the very beginning of her acquaintance with Psyche, she felt sorry for her, because she was a naive girl who had nothing. But now it was she who was taking away everything they loved, as if she had planned everything in advance with the prince, and this also angered Marquis Hel. Hel remembered the cunning face of Prince Yalos, explaining to the depressed Malaya that the real enemy had been hiding all this time, as if in the shadows, and had acted in such a way that he would be remembered only last, and that this person was the crown prince. And now, when Malaya is in Psyche's fragile body, lying in the forest so that she can no longer speak because of her great wounds, she still thinks about revenge and about how she will soon arrange a real show for the prince and all the naive aristocrats in honor of her return. Malaya didn't even suspect that while she was practically dying, the prince was smiling and holding a glass of wine in his hands and celebrating his birthday, being completely sure that the blame for the murder would fall on Malaya, who allegedly disappeared in order to kill his wife, but everything is not so. All the prince's confidence could have easily disappeared if he knew that not only Psyche and Malaya had learned of his insidious plan, but also the Marquise, who ran ahead of Psyche at incredible speed to find Malaya in Psyche's body, which surprised the girl, but she tried to follow him. She looked at him with her mouth open, knowing full well that if she were in her fragile body, she definitely wouldn't be able to run even a couple of meters at such a speed. But Hel himself had no intention of slowing down. even when his heart seemed about to jump out of his chest, all in order to find Malaya. Hell was moving further and further away from Psyche, because he understood that every second could be his last. So he had no right to be late, but was obliged to appear in the right place as quickly as possible and save Malay from everyone and everything. He seemed to feel that the one in his friend's body was gradually losing strength, because she was weak on her feet and felt pain in one eye, because it was bleeding, all because of the battle with the armed girl who had inflicted the wound on her. When Malaya realized that the vision in her injured eye would definitely deteriorate, if not be lost completely, she stood before the commander-in-chief, who was waving her sword and smilingly telling her opponent that the time had come for her victory. Immediately after this, the girl, shouting at the heroine to lay down her weapon, pounced on her with a powerful attack, intending to cut her in half. But this time, too, Malaya deftly managed to fight back with a single dagger, deflecting her blow and stepping aside, creating the perfect moment to attack. Noticing the random blows of her opponent, Malaya realized that it would not be difficult to strike, so she did so, which is why, immediately after the heroine managed to run to the side, blood gushed from the girl's body. But even this did not stop the warrior, who only stood still and thought motionlessly about how no matter how hard the blonde tried to kill her, she would still deal with her as cruelly and mercilessly as her master, the prince, wanted. Wishing Malaya to die as quickly as possible, the girl immediately appeared right in front of her and pinned her against a tree, intending to cut her throat with a sharp blade, which she held next to the protagonist's face. The blade was getting closer, despite the fact that Malaya was spending all her strength to push her opponent away from herself. And at that moment, trying to utter at least some word, she realized that she needed to deliver the final blow, since she had almost no strength left. The girl did not expect at all that the blonde could trip her, and, taking advantage of her confusion, run away. But when she noticed that the golden-haired girl herself was staggering and about to fall, she realized that defeating her would not be difficult. For a moment, the commander-in-chief of the warriors noticed a sharp stone protruding from the ground, which was located right next to the tree. And when she realized that the blonde definitely could not have noticed it, because all this time she was weak and helpless. But the girl had no idea that a few seconds ago Malaya had managed to feel the sharp stone with her foot, fully realizing that it could be an excellent weapon for the final blow. The warrior thought of the danger too late, because immediately after that, Malaya in Psyche's body was able to grab her and force her to fall right onto the blade, causing the girl to feel incredible pain, powerlessness, and cold, along with darkness in her eyes. Thanks to this, the heroine not only pierced her body from below with a stone, but also plunged her dagger into her chest, realizing with her eyes closed that after such a blow, she would definitely not survive, and she could only listen to her dying words. Suddenly, the dying woman grabbed the blonde by the clothes and said in a weak voice that this was impossible, because the prince had previously made it clear to her entire team that Psyche was a weak girl who would be easy to kill. She screamed with astonished eyes and blood all over her body that it was unfair, because they had believed in her weakness all this time, but they had fallen into a trap in which everyone died except Psyche herself. Malaya just remained silent and did not dare to tell her opponent that in fact she was far from crazy. Although when she looked at her, she was surprised that the girl fought with her to the end, being devoted to the prince and his desires until the very end. However, when the lady saw in the hands of the dying girl a dagger with poison on the blade, with which she had managed to invisibly wound Malaya, the exhausted heroine was already falling to the ground, realizing that the poison would definitely not leave her a chance to survive. It was at this moment that the white-haired Hell finally appeared in the garden, stopped, and looked at the bloody picture with a shocked face, not believing that among the corpses he could recognize his beloved mistress. He was so afraid of losing her that memories of how he had a fun time with Malaya and was so happy to see her that he smiled and did not stop doing so. When Malaya said that for the work he had done for her, he could be rewarded with something, Malaya told him to ask her for whatever he wanted, and then the sweet guy smiled even more charmingly, saying that he only wanted one thing, or rather, that he could see her sleeping with his own eyes. As soon as Malaya heard these words, she immediately became indignant and angry at the guy, getting ready to yell at him, which is why the confused Hell began to wave his hands and blush, explaining that he was talking about something completely different, and even the Marquis's ears turned red. He explained his desire by the fact that whenever he came to visit her, he saw her awake, for example, reading a book, sitting at the table in the bedroom, but he never saw the girl resting, sleeping, and therefore he wondered if she slept at all. The sweet man with rosy cheeks smiled at the lady again and said that his wish was for a simple moment where he could see Malaya relaxing and enjoying life. However, now, when he is in a cold forest and sees the body of Psyche with the soul of his beloved aristocrat, he, with pain in his soul, cannot believe that his wish for fate can change for the worse. The boy was so shocked by what was happening that he immediately picked up the dagger with poison and brought it to his neck with a crazy smile and tears, saying that if he could not protect Malaya in this life, he would also die to go to another world with her. But at that very moment, when his hand was about to pierce his throat, he did not feel pain, although he clearly heard a crunch, and blood appeared on the blade of the weapon. The stunned Marquis realized that someone had stopped him. And it was true, because in fact, Psyche and Malaya's body had stopped him in time, sacrificed her palm so that it would pierce her hand, but did not injure him. And the girl also told the guy that this was not the time to be weak. He needed to pull himself together and save Psyche. Crying and shocked, Hel turned around and looked at his friend, while the Psyche itself in his friend's body saw the body of the dying Malaya behind him, telling his friend that he was sure that Malaya was still alive. As soon as Psyche looked into the distance, she saw not only countless pools of blood on the ground, but also the corpses of knights who lay lifeless and no longer showed signs of life, which made it difficult for the girl to believe that her friend had done all this. But when the girl, with her eyes wide with shock, tried to understand what had happened here, suddenly Malaya's hand in Psyche's body grabbed her by the dress and was already getting ready to pull her down. Malaya stood up with difficulty and told her friend that she shouldn't be so surprised because all these people had come to kill her. But this time they had lost their own lives. And because of this, Psyche, in someone else's body, was even more surprised. The blonde, with a sinister smile and veins on her face, looked at her friend, asking her what it was like to escape death thanks to God's whim. And Psyche, in her own body, looked at the dying girl with silent amazement. Also, Malaya, in Psyche's body, being completely covered in blood, asked her friend to look at her and tell her if she didn't look like she was born to be a victim. Because even that day, as Malaya herself said, was enough for her to feel pain. As soon as the heroine screamed in anger, blood gushed out of her mouth and the girl choked on it, coughing non-stop. And at that moment, the Marquise and Psyche understood perfectly well that Malaya's condition in Psyche's body was much worse than it might seem. Understanding the terrible situation, the Psyche in the wrong body began to cry and fell to her knees before her friend, asking for forgiveness without stopping, and so desperately that the girl's body shook with fear and excitement, which spoke of the sincerity of her feelings. Then the surprised Malaya in her body asked the girl what she was apologizing for, hinting that she could blame herself for her death, which was about to happen. Or Psyche was apologizing for the very moment when they both fell into the water and exchanged bodies with the help of divine magic. The girl also recalled the most shocking moment of her life, when she saw Psyche with a crown on her head, with a cane and the status of a princess, not understanding whether her friend was truly repenting before her or pretending to be sorry, because all her actions and decisions were terrible. As she lay dying, Malaya remembered the prince, realizing that he too should ask her forgiveness, since he was the very man who, with a smile and without any shame, manipulated Psyche and ordered her to also fight for the title of princess. The heroine didn't even suspect that a red-haired woman had previously appeared before the prince, and, bowing to him, shouted that they had done everything as he had told them. And to this, the satisfied young man replied that they had tried hard, and that it had now become clear that the prince had deliberately hired a spy who had changed the mood of the crowd, forcing them to vote for Psyche. But the prince also used a beautiful jeweled cross, a symbol of faith in his insidious plan, which he was prepared to use as a deadly gift. He was able to receive this decoration not from some Stolen, but from Malaya's mother herself, who stood before the prince and was upset when he explained that while his father could not meet her in person, he could give her gift to him. The red-haired woman didn't seem too confident, and she looked at the prince with reluctance. But she had no choice but to give the box containing the ornament to the prince, hoping that he would give it to the emperor. The prince was so cunning that he used this thing as a poisonous gift to his own father, pouring a deadly poison on the precious cross in advance so that the emperor would die, and all the blame would fall on the Belial family, who wanted to present the item to the ruler. The guy's plan worked because right in the imperial palace, servants and butlers suddenly noticed that the emperor had become very ill. He was coughing and was about to lose consciousness from lack of air, the effect of the poison from the jewelry. Taking advantage of the situation, the prince immediately played the role of an excited son who ran up to his father and tried to help him, telling everyone that someone had just wanted to kill his father. So he orders the first thing to do is search the Belial Palace, because they are the first suspects in this. Malaya realized all this too late, already preparing to meet her death. But she still remembered the sly smile of Prince Yalos, the man who was actually destroying her family slowly, but surely and without mistakes. The girl wanted to tell her friend Psyche about all this in her own body, but she was so weak that she could not move her tongue. And the black-haired Psyche, noticing the blonde's sad state, wanted to turn to the Marquis with the idea of going to the palace for help as soon as possible. But the girl did not say what she wanted, because she noticed the terrifying expression on the face of the Hell, who cried even harder and, it seemed, did not listen to her, understanding only that the Melia was about to die. He looked at the barely breathing body of the lady, which was quickly turning pale and torn into terrible lines due to the poison. With silent shock, he thought only about the fact that he had killed an incredible number of people, but he still could not accept the death of Malaya. Psyche, in someone else's body, also noticed the pallor of her friend's skin and the rapid deterioration of her condition. So she screamed, realizing that Malaya in her body was about to die because someone actually intended to kill her, but she still couldn't figure out who exactly. The girl's true soul and body suddenly seem to find themselves in another world where there is no one. She is in a beautiful dress and is pure, but she clutches her hair, covers her ears, and tries to scream from shock, realizing that the only one who all this time knew how valuable she is her beloved Yalos. Realizing that her beloved man actually wanted to kill her, Psyche looked at her own body, which contained Malaya's soul, and understood that if the gods had originally wanted this outcome, she would never have agreed to it. Saddened and grief-stricken, Psyche, like the Marquis, stood near Malaya's body and thought about the girl's last words, when she confessed that one day was enough for her to feel all the pain. Suddenly, Malaya found herself in her own body, but not in the forest, but right under the water. Looking at the owl's hands, she began to greedily inhale the air, not understanding where she had ended up. Although this place was very familiar to the one she had fallen into when she switched bodies with Psyche, the girl was at the very bottom of some huge lake where there was only white sand, and the lady herself was in a light white dress. She looked around and realized that it was very similar to the fountain in which she could drown on the day of prayer. But why the girl was here, she still could not understand. The black-haired girl opened her mouth and began to look at everything around her, not understanding whether she had died and was in heaven or whether she had moved to some other dimension. But Meal did not receive an answer, because she seemed to be in a void. Having come to the conclusion that she would have to find all the answers to her questions on her own, Malaya decided to calmly get to her feet and start walking, although she doesn't know where or why. But she feels that she ended up here for a reason. And the girl was able to reach a huge stone wall, which seemed to be the highest and endless in the world, and it was she who blocked his path. And the lady herself calmly raised her hand, intending to touch the massive structure. The girl peered intently at each brick that made up the wall, wondering what it was guarding and what was behind it. But it seemed the lady would not be able to see anything further, because of her. Putting her hand on the wall, the girl began to look around to find at least something interesting, and she managed to do this because she noticed a hole in the wall nearby, into which she could probably not only look, but also reach out. It was she who interested the lady, so she came closer to her, wondering what could be in such a dark crevice, and the girl was already looking at her from all sides, getting closer and trying to see at least something in the darkness. And what was her surprise when, in the darkness, the girl noticed little Psyche, who, with disheveled hair and a tired look, looked at her and asked only about what freedom was, which frightened Malaya, and made her think that this was far from the friend she was used to seeing. Melly realized that she was about to learn about the past of this sad girl, and this turned out to be true because she saw a vision of the same girl sitting on the bed with her mother and reading a book, asking the woman what she knew about the world outside, as if she had never been there. The little girl with fair hair and a sad voice looked at the pictures of a dragon in the book, pictures of battles and knights, telling her mother that the fairy tales talked about fire-breathing creatures, brave heroes, eternal battles, which interested her even more. And as soon as the child asked her mother why she couldn't get to know such an interesting world, the woman immediately grabbed her by the shoulders and looked into her eyes with crazy anxiety, saying that they had already talked many times about how it was very dangerous outside her room and that she had to stay here to survive. They were in a simple and unremarkable room where a candle was burning and the most ordinary objects were on the table, when the mother explained to the girl's psyche that she was born special, blessed by God, and if she caught anyone's eye, enemies, blinded by envy, would tear her to pieces. Then the mother decided to read the girl another fairy tale, for example, about a red-haired princess who was very interested in learning about the outside world, which made her happy and laugh, even though she spent her days in treasures and divine love. However, due to doubts about divine power and for her desire to go out into the outside world, God punished her, sent a curse and plunged her into eternal sleep, because of which the princess one day fell to the ground, never waking up again. And her mother, having told a fairy tale, ordered Psyche not to doubt divine love either. It was with the idea of believing in love that Psyche grew up, one day becoming an adult, a dreamy blonde who believed in God and bright feelings, although she had never seen the former, while at this time, servants around her were actively moving furniture, picking out vases and making the bed, as if preparing for something. Suddenly, the red-eyed father appeared next to the lady, who looked at his daughter with bewilderment, asking why his daughter had such a strange expression on her face, but then realized that lately it had been difficult because of the events related to her mother, because of which he himself could not get used to reality. And the father also said that now the girl would live in her mother's room. Sometime after this, Psyche decided to meet her lover, finding him under a tree, and the guy himself asked the girl with a smile whether she had received some kind of gift from him. This was the girl's very first meeting with Prince Yalos, who seemed kind and smiling, so the naive Psyche thought that she had become free and happy thanks to him, who for the girl was not just a guy, but a real god. They both sat under a tree, and Yalam calmly told his beloved that he had a feeling that if she stayed by his side, he could really become a god, which sounded very ambiguous. But the blonde did not understand it. The prince closed his eyes, as if confessing to the heroine that he was incredibly tired of his current life, because each day was more painful than the previous one, and it sounded as if the guy wanted to deliberately evoke a feeling of pity in Psyche. And at that moment, when the sincere but frivolous Psyche already believed that the guy in front of her was a god, and thanks to him she would always believe in love and support him, the prince himself opened his eyes, and with a serious voice admitted that he was aware that recently rumors had been circulating about his girlfriend's friendship with Lady Belial, Malaya. And Malaya herself, from an incomprehensible position, peering into the vision through the crack, was amazed and wary, realizing that at that very moment the prince had begun to force the blonde to think badly of Malaya, as if she were an enemy who would use her. Malaya clearly saw that at that moment Psyche laughed, telling the prince that she could not treat Malaya badly and not communicate with her, even if the guy asked her to stay away from the black-haired lady, because she was her first best friend. After that day, naive Psyche began to pray every day to God, as if to a bright light somewhere far away, believing that she would be able to maintain the harmony and happiness that she now had, because now she lived in a beautiful world of miracles, and not in a terrible hell as her mother frightened her. And the black-haired lady, bowing her head down from the realization of everything, realized that this could be the end of her knowledge of Psyche's past, because she finally understood who was to blame for what happened and why her friend was behaving this way. Looking at the large wall, the girl finally understood its meaning, because in each of the people there is such a structure that does not allow him to fence himself off from the whole world in an attempt to protect himself, to see only something specific, but not the true world. Malaya, still near that very hole, sometimes heard Psyche's voice coming from it, saying that she doubted everything. Although she was sure that ignorance of everything could save her life in this cruel world, help her turn away from evil, cruelty, and people who probably wanted to kill her for some kind of gift. The girl imagined a beautiful sunset as the end of everything, because earlier Psyche herself believed that she would have a wonderful life. And Malaya, striving for success and a status title, wanted to create a wonderful career for herself. But both aristocrats seemed to be punished by the gods. Psyche herself recalled the confident and courageous Malaya, who held the coat of arms in her hands and already wanted to receive the title of princess with a smile. And the blonde admitted that she would like to become as strong as she was, so that one day she could boldly face her fears. However, Psyche was so frightened and unsure that for days she only remembered that very basement where she had been, it seemed, all her childhood, and was afraid to even look out the window to see the world. She only wanted to create imaginary walls and barriers around herself. Remembering those very fairy tales about dragons and knights, The girl realized that she had spent her entire childhood thinking about something unreal, instead of at least for a moment looking at the real world and loving it. A saddened Psyche, realizing that she was only making things worse with her decisions, looked at Malaya with tears on the day of prayer and asked her if she hated her for becoming a princess and choosing Yalos. Although the whole situation made Psyche not only despair, but also realize that her existence had brought only pain to her loved ones. Hearing the familiar ringing, the girl remembered the holy cross that was on her neck immediately after the ceremony of receiving the title of princess. She realized that it seemed that this thing had decided her entire fate, while at the same time being an ordinary jewel in appearance. But now, when Malaya's soul was underwater, she raised her head up and saw the light, the crystal-clear water, realizing that in fact, on the day of prayer, Psyche seemed to be praying to the gods for death. Although something happened that no one expected, Malaya hugged herself sadly, as if her soul ached more from the thought that on the day of prayer, Psyche wanted to commit suicide so as not to bother anyone anymore. And then the heroine realized that even though she hated her, she certainly would not have killed her friend then as she would not have killed her now. With her hands on the wall, the black-haired girl felt as if every terrible thought consumed her mind and forced her to look at Psyche in a new way, knowing full well that if they were reborn 1,000 times, all of this would happen again, all because of their desire for personal happiness. And suddenly the girl heard the stern voice of a certain deity who spoke directly to her, asking if she got what she wanted so much when she swapped bodies with her friend, wanting to take away all her happiness. And the god's words forced Malaya to cover her face with shame and fall silent. Then the villainess understood everything, uncovering her face and looking ahead indifferently, telling the god that she should not die just like that, when others easily get what they wanted, even by unfair means, and she and her friends are forced to suffer. The thought that from now on she would not let the criminal, Prince Yalos, escape justice filled her with strength and energy, which manifested itself in the form of shining rays circling around her, which were like God's blessing and help, which surprised her. And while in reality, Psyche and her friend's body cried at the mere thought that Malaya could no longer be saved, the girl's true soul watched everything that was happening and was preparing to believe such a foolish girl as Psyche, because it was she who had filled her with strength for a long time. Already completely pale and with dark lines on her face, which rather indicated the effect of a deadly poison, Malaya solemnly proclaimed to herself that the moment had come not only to take revenge on everyone for the years of pain and suffering, but also for a comedy in which everyone, including Prince Yalos, would be ridiculed. Psyche herself at that moment was perfectly aware of her helplessness, and that's why she cried, clenched her fist, and screamed that she didn't want to be a worthless weakling, a pawn that everyone would use when necessary. Hel looked at the sad picture of Psyche and Malaya's body next to her dying friend, and understood that she was so weak that she could not save her, and they had a maximum of a minute, a few seconds, to say goodbye to Malaya. The magical clock of life, whose hands should have stopped at any moment, still continued to tick, as if giving an imaginary hope that there was a chance to save the girl from the deadly poison and serious wounds. Realizing her mistake and that on the day of prayer she should not have asked the god for death, but on the contrary for change, the lady at the last moment began to hope that everything could still be changed. And at that moment, a bitter tear of the girl fell from her face directly onto the body of the dying Malaya. Sadly thinking that she should not have stuck to the strategy of ignorance in the first place, as if it would save her from this sinister world, the girl did not notice how a drop of her blood fell on Malaya's body just like a tear, but it was trying to fall right on the jewelry that the prince had given to Malaya earlier in Pisha's body. And it was this falling drop that created an extraordinary magical light around Psyche, which even made the heroine lean back, not understanding what was happening and where such sudden magic came from. Looking at the shining gold jewelry her friend was wearing, the girl remembered that this relic was used not as a decoration for a holiday, but for religious services dedicated to requests for peace and prosperity. And it was this jewelry that the blonde had tried on earlier with a smile. Psyche immediately realized that Prince Yalos wanted to see this decoration on Malaya's body on his birthday. But when the green-eyed lady was already at the celebration, she looked away, because she noticed that the prince was looking at her. The thing is, the brunette was smiling and looked very pleased, confessing to Malaya about his wife's body, saying that he thought that this decoration would suit her. It seems that the commander-in-chief herself knew something even more shocking, when at the very last moment of her life she grabbed Malaya by the clothes, because she saw that same strange but precious necklace on her. At that moment, the girl, completely covered in blood, screamed shockingly that she hadn't thought the blonde would be so strong and resilient, since Yalos had described her differently. But it was the necklace that had been protecting Malaya, in the body of the weak Psyche, from death all this time. The mystical light from the jewel was also noticed by Hel, who watched what was happening with a shkomo on his face, realizing that the warm glow was not just an effect, but a power that could heal all wounds and literally before our eyes. The healing she received not only helped Malaya return to life and heal all her wounds, but also allow her to breathe in the air with renewed strength, as if she had been born a second time, only without feeling any pain, discomfort, or cold. Stunned, Psyche and Hel watched as the previously dying and pale Melee rose and clutched her throat, feeling a dryness in it that the lady herself compared to the feeling of being on her deathbed again. And the blonde, rising to her feet, prepared herself for the worst with the thought that if all this horror was only the beginning, then she shouldn't be surprised at what would happen next. Although Psyche and Hel were now, on the contrary, looking at Malaya with complete blindness. Psyche, in a foreign body, could not fully believe that her friend had been healed in a matter of moments, so she began to cry bitterly again, stretching out her hands to her as if she were a heavenly angel, asking if she was alive. But Malaya herself seemed less surprised by what was happening and maintained an icy calm, replying that she was indeed fine, looking at her friends with bewilderment and suggesting that they tell her everything that had happened during her entire absence, because it was very important. And when the girl realized that the guy and the girl were still in a state of shock and couldn't even string a few words together, the blonde sighed and called them to her to hug her frightened partners. Immediately after this, the couple pounced on Malaya and they fell to the ground together, not believing that the worst was behind them and that all they could do was calm down or burst into tears of happiness, which not only Psyche but also the restrained Hel had already done. Feeling the warmth of her friend's body, the black-haired Psyche began to cry even more desperately, admitting that she was very worried about Malaya, and was incredibly happy that everything ended with her healing. But Malaya herself was silent and only looked at her friends. But suddenly, the astonished Psyche, not even expecting that the one who had hated her before would show her kindness and mercy, felt her friend's hand on the top of her head, as if she wanted to comfort and calm her, stroking her with care and tenderness. Only after everyone had calmed down, Psyche, in her friend's body, decided to reveal her main secret and reveal what had really happened. She took off her glove and showed her friends her hand, where the wound was instantly healing with a pleasant light. The lady herself said that she had the gift of healing from birth, and it seemed that only she and the Empire had it, thanks to which the girl saved her friend. Remembering the appearance of Malaya before her death, when she drank the deadly poison, turned pale before her eyes, became covered in terrible lines and was about to die, Psyche admitted that she was afraid that her magic would not work, because she was quite weak and practically powerless against fatal wounds.